we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to turn it right over to Brad and just let him get going. We'll still have a few others popping in, but I'll just make sure that everyone gets in. So we're glad to see you today. And it's going to be a good day. So Brad, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks everyone. And I am recognizing some of the names from in person and from on. Okay. All right. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, I'm not sure. All right. So
Bill can hear you.
Kelly, it might be on your end because I can hear him on my end.
Yeah, I can also hear you.
Okay. Huh, interesting. Okay, cool. So everyone can hear me. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? All right, it looks like everyone can hear me, Kelly. I'm not quite sure what's going on your end. So I promise I won't say anything about Kelly, even though she can't hear me or anything.
I can hear you now, but go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh man,
I'll get you back.
All right, cool. Yeah, I was getting paranoid there for a second. I was like, okay, am I just talking to the abyss?
Sorry, my bad.
You're cool. It's all good. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. It is, it's a busy time of the year, and I know that, and I realize that. So, we're gonna talk about some stuff today that's going to be helpful, I think, and going to be useful because it's an interesting year. It's an interesting year for sure. So I feel like the stuff that I'm going to talk about though relates exactly to what you're going through right now, and will hopefully give you some solutions and some suggestions for what you're going to be talking about. Do keep in mind that over the course of these couple of days that we had together, there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that might overwhelm you. You're not going to do all of this at once immediately in your school. Hopefully you can pick a few tidbits out that you can start with, and we're going to have some time to think about that as well. But I'm giving you a bigger picture of things that are in a restorative school from our lens. And you obviously are going to implement them slowly and not all at once with your school. So if you feel a little bit overwhelmed, that's normal. But I want to give you the bigger picture so you have a better idea of where to start. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started today. And all right, is my screen being shared? Can you all see that? Okay, cool. And again, I don't actually think the screen can be shared unless I ask and verbally say if my screen's being shared. And if you notice, I have some fall decor going up right here. So I'm getting a little bit fancy with my background. It's actually my wife who likes to decorate Halloween all over the entire house. So that also made it to my office. So in case you were wondering, that was my wife, not me, but I do appreciate it, of course, right? Yep, don't tell her I said anything. All right, so getting started today with our Hackett School Discipline part 2 with our foundational training. And if you do have questions, make sure you do put them in the chat. And if you want to unmute yourself, throughout the day and ask me a question, that's fine too. There's not that many people in this Zoom today. As usual, be vulnerable. Say what you really think. Let me know if you think something is, going to be rough or hard with your kids. Be open-minded. These practices do work. It's just a matter of they might not work right away. They might not work the first time you try it. They might not work the third time you try it, but these practices are tried and true. But you might need to adapt them for whatever your school setting is. Lastly, again, remember that we have to think about this from the perspective of others, not just our perspective, our upbringing, our backgrounds. And it's hard to do, to kind of think about this. Like I said last time, I grew up in, I moved around everywhere. I was in 8 different school districts in 12 years, never in one school system more than a year and a half in a row. I went through some trauma in my childhood with my parents, but I still grew up white and a male. So all of these things shape who I am and my perspective on life. So do keep that in mind with your own perspective. There's a lot of others in that as well. We're going to start the day in mindfulness And this one is something I do with staff. It's something I do with kids. Any staff meeting you ever have, any class I ever have, I always do mindfulness. And the reason why I always do mindfulness is because you all as educators are thinking about your emails right now, right? You all as educators are thinking about that one parent call you need to make in a little bit, right? You're thinking about all these things in your future. You're thinking about all the things that happened yesterday in your past. This allows us to focus on the now and be centered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video with you. In case you're wondering, this is 10 hours long. So if you ever want to be really, really mindful, this Canva video literally is 10 hours long, but I've never watched 10 hours with it because that would be kind of interesting. But here's what we do with this candle mindfulness. We're going to just stare at the flame for about 30 seconds to a minute. You can do this as long as you want, but the thing is, I want you to stare at the flame and not break eye contact with it. Don't look at anything else. Don't look at anything in your walls. Don't look at anything behind you. Just stare at the flame for 30 seconds to a minute until I say something next. The next instruction will be breathing in and breathing out the flame, but we're not going to be there first. The first instruction is just to stare at the flame for 30 seconds to a minute, and please do not break eye contact with the flame. You can blink, that'd be okay. You can blink, but don't look away from it. All right, ready? And go. All right, what I want you to do now is I want you to breathe in the flame. We're going to breathe in the warmth, the love, the positivity of this flame. We're going to breathe out the anxiety, the things that are bothering us. So we're literally, when we breathe out, think about breathing out and moving the flame away from you. You're breathing the flame in towards you, the love, the warmth. You're breathing out the bad stuff, the anxiety, the negativity. And when you're breathing out, you're pushing the flame away from you. So you're bringing the flame to you, you're pushing the flame away from you. We're going to do 10 breaths together, breathing in, breathing out. Ready? And go. In, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. Do 5 more on your own. Ready? Go. All right. And hopefully you've had a chance to breathe in and breathe out. Obviously, you can't have an open flame in your classroom or your school. So that's why I did, in fact, use a YouTube video for this. It's not exactly the same as having a real flame, but it's a little bit safer. But the kids actually do like it, and so do the adults. All right, now that we're a little bit centered, let's talk about today. All right, what I want us to do at this time is think about this. Think about a costume that you're gonna wear, that you've worn in the past, or that you might wear. What costume would best describe how you're feeling right now? Think about that for a second. If you had to put on a costume for Halloween or just to wear to school, what costume would you put on that would kind of represent your state right now, your emotional state right now? And it can be funny, like there's no wrong answer. It can be a little bit funny. It can be a little bit crazy. you know what I mean? But if you had to wear a costume, what would you be wearing right now? So I want you to think about that for just a second. I want you to put that into the chat. If you had to dress up right now, what would you be wearing? I'm seeing Sleepy from the Seven Dwarfs. Sounds about right. What else y'all got? Hibernating bear. That's definitely, so you all seem a little bit tired. What else? Positivity and peace. People with shaved heads and red togas in California. Huh. I have not seen that with the red togas, but that definitely sounds very, very interesting. Beetlejuice. Nice. If it was me, I would dress up as a 2017-18 educator, because that was when I had energy and the ability to, you know, go to school without mask and go to school without all of this, you know, craziness going on. And that would be just because I'm trying to think positively. So I'm remembering the good old days. Remember the good old days? Way back in the past where we could go to restaurants and we could go out and eat and we could go to movies and all that kind of stuff. Oh, I'm seeing a Frozen princess, Let It Go. Yep. That'd be a custom too. So if you think of anything else, go ahead and put that in the chat. It's one of those things too where you know, if we had to personify or we had to wear a costume, there's a whole lot of interesting choices we could have. But if you think of something in the next minute or two, please go ahead and put that in that chat if you haven't put something in there yet. I actually thought about like wearing, I don't know if you all watch The Office. The Office is one of my favorite shows, and one of the costumes that one of the characters, Jim Halpert, wears is just a white dress shirt with 3 black holes on it. He's a hole punch or something like that. So I would get that basic just to have a costume, but I'm gonna wear whatever my wife gives me to wear. I don't even know what we're wearing yet, but I'll find out on October 30th when I have something interesting to put on. All right, thank you for sharing that. And again, you can go ahead and put that into the chat if you have anything else that you think of. Before we get started, I want to, first of all, thank you. You are with me, you're learning new stuff. I'm gonna tell you a lot of things you may or may not be doing, but here's what I want you to keep in mind is that you do have great things happening in your school right now. In every classroom in your school, there are great things happening. There's relationships happening. There's kids that are happy. There are staff members that are, you know, doing great things. You're doing great things in your school. Your school is a good place for kids to be. So do keep that in mind. We're focusing today on all the things we might do, all the things we might change, all the things we might implement and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't mean that you're not already doing fantastic things with what you're doing with kids at your school. So that's something I want you to keep in mind. And when you go to these trainings, you can think that, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's all doom and gloom. We're not doing that. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. And I get that. But at the same time, like, that's why you're here, to get better. It doesn't mean like I wasn't called in to help you all because you all were just sucking it up and being terrible and like, oh my gosh, go and fix this. No, you all are here because you want to get better and learn some more stuff. So do keep that in mind. Something else I want us to keep in mind when we come to, you know, thinking about our school year. This is a graphic that I saw that made me stop in my tracks, and you might have seen this on social media. But essentially, this is an example of when the last normal school year occurred for our students. So if you are seeing freshman behaviors out of your seniors, if you are seeing 5th grade behaviors out of your 8th graders and so forth and so on, this is why. We have not had that stability, that consistency. You've not had that safe place for some of our kids for years. Like, this is our 3rd year in a pandemic, our 3rd year being affected by a pandemic in a row. Remember when we thought it was going to be 2 weeks? We thought, oh, we're going to be off for 2 weeks, and it was around spring break time. And guess what? It wasn't 2 weeks. It was now in our 3rd year. So when we're thinking about all this stuff, it is, quite a given that things are not the way they were. And when we started this school year, most of us have our kids in person. We tried to teach like they were, in normal school again. The reality is that the kids don't have academic gaps as much as they have social emotional gaps. Like they literally did not have the same interactions they would typically have. You also have kids going into kindergarten that never went to preschool, never went to daycare because of the pandemic as well. So we're starting off without that experience in school. And if you can imagine, the college professors are getting seniors graduating, going into college. Can you imagine college professors dealing with behavior problems? Can you imagine? I bet you college professors right now are dealing with more behavioral problems that they're not prepared for, because that's not part of the typical college professor life, in my opinion, right? So everyone has it hard. Every school that I've talked to, every school that I work with is saying this is the hardest year ever. So if you're feeling that, you're not alone. It is a really challenging year, but what we're going to learn today is hopefully going to alleviate some of that stress. It's not going to fix it. It's not going to build everything the kids lost in 3 years, but it is the best way to work with kids going forward with our current school year. So what's the point of today? What's the point of the last couple of days? This consistency, the stability that kids need is more important than ever, in my opinion, because we had such inconsistency, we had instability more often than ever in a lot of our schooling careers. Restorative practices, which is what we focus on, social emotional learning, again, are more important than ever. So if you're thinking it's one more thing on your plate, I get it. I might think that too. But the reality is that we need to do these things to make our own jobs easier. And we need to do these things to make life for our kids better. So it's not one more thing, it's something we can do that hopefully makes our job better. And it makes it easier for ourselves, and it makes it easier for our kids. So I don't view it as one more thing. I view it as something we can do to help with our current situation with our kids. Sometimes I come across things and I share them with you because I find great things on the internet. I hear great things and strategies from afar. I go to trainings, I pick up those strategies. This has nothing to do really with our presentation today, but it is something I want you to share with your staffs if you haven't seen it yourselves. But when we think about getting our class to quiet down, we do that. If you hear my voice clap once, you hear my voice clap twice, you hear my voice clap 3 times thing a lot. This is a way to get breathing and deep breathing into your actual getting the kids' attention. So it's not like, okay, everyone, let's circle up and do some breathing. No, if you hear my voice, breathe once and do a deep breath. If you hear my voice, take 2 deep breaths. So it's a calming exercise for kids instead of telling them to clap. And I thought, holy cow, how have I never thought of this? And how has no one else ever thought of this before? But this is a great thing to share with your teachers if you haven't shared it. And when you're thinking about this strategy, or think about all these strategies, again, this is something I could do tomorrow. This is something I can immediately go and do with my class next period, kind of thing. And I actually did this in person with the adults yesterday when I was in Kentucky. And, I think it went over pretty well. All right. I've done enough talking in a row. We are going to have breakout sessions today. We are going to have interactions with each other, and we're going to take a break. We're going to try and take a break every hour.
We're not friends
Is
anymore.
Anna to meet? Are you meeting
Yes.
already? Sorry.
Wait.
We're going to try to take a break every single hour, because I know Zoom fatigue is real. I know that it's hard to be on Zoom for a long period of time in a row. So we are going to make sure that we take breaks every hour or so. Okay, so I want you all to keep that in mind. What I'm going to do to get us talking to each other, you learned a lot of stuff last time. I want to know what it is that you have thought about since the last time we've met. Like, what have you thought about? Have you thought about nothing? Have you tried something? Is there something in your head that you were thinking about? Like, what have you thought about since the last time we met? What's going on in your school? What's on your mind right now with everything? And if you remember, last time we talked a lot about proactive strategies. Today we're talking about reactive strategies. But what have you thought about since the last time that we met? What's going on in your current world, kind of thing? So I am going to put you into breakout rooms. I'm going to have 3 breakout rooms that are assigned. And we're just going to have a discussion about what are all the things on our mind right now since our last training, like what's going on, kind of thing. So I'm going to open the rooms. Go ahead and accept, jump into a room. I'm going to put the prompt into the room as well. But we're going to have about, 8-9 minutes or so to kind of talk about this. All right, welcome back, everyone. The rooms will be closed in about 30 seconds. So 30 seconds, we'll resume. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had some good discussions. So would anyone be vulnerable and share a few things that you've thought about since last time, or your group said? Did you hear anything great in your breakout room, or do you have anything that you'd like to share aloud? If you could just go ahead and unmute yourself and share any thoughts that you had, or the gist of the group discussion. But would anyone be willing to be vulnerable and kind of share a little bit about what happened in your group?
I can. I'm Miranda. I'm from Elizabethtown Independent. In our group, I had talked about the relationship building with students. Right now we're looking at, an 8th grade group of kids that have majority of the referrals in our middle school, and just trying to build that relationship with those top referral kids. And one of the girls in the group had said that they had a kid that was kind of like the top dog, was the leader, and they helped that kid build a relationship with one of the PE teachers and helped him become a leader himself. And he hasn't had any referrals since. So it just kind of gave me some, I guess, extra motivation to try to help these kids at the middle school before they go to high school.
That's awesome. So you said you have them kind of, did you say you had them in a group of some sort?
We're going to look at doing groups or individuals depending on what the referrals are about. And we don't want to put the kids that are in kind of, I guess, together if they're making trouble together.
Absolutely. I do have, and I sent it to Kelly, something that might be helpful for that group. It's a thing called the Zone, which we might or might not get to today, but I did send that information to Kelly. It is a way to do that we're talking about in a group, and what it looks like and how it's structured and stuff like that. So if anyone in this chat wants that, it's called the Zone, and it's about putting kids that it's like an alternative to in-school suspension. It's an alternative to, you might kick a kid out for 2 days, but instead of 2 days, we'll do 1 day if we come to the Zone and we have this kind of group meeting and group. It's almost like a group therapy session, kind of thing like that. So Kelly did mention that she's going to share out resources from today with you all in the chat, but it's awesome. And I'm so glad to hear that you're thinking that way. And that success story is huge. Like just that one kid is huge, making a big difference. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, would anyone like to add to what Miranda said, or have anything else that came about in your group, or something that you feel you've thought about since our last meeting?
I was just telling my group that I do look for, I'm Carol Brown with E-Town too, and I work with Miranda and Tabitha Kerr, but she just talked about doing the groups because we've been looking at our data, and it's our 8th grade class. And after seeing your picture, it makes sense on why that 8th grade class, there's 75% of the referrals in that building. And it makes sense why, looking at that too. You know, I always thought of, you know, it's only been maybe a year and a half, 2 years, but really if you look at their complete full year, so they're kind of still stuck then in elementary, right? Their mindset is in their well-being and social emotional growing and all that. But I was telling our group with our teachers, like I look forward to today because of the reactive piece, as far as giving some strategies to the teachers, because some of our teachers can be proactive and some are not. And a lot of it is because in those moments that they are having with a student, they feel like nothing is working. So then they don't value when you're talking about being proactive, because all they want to know is what to do in that moment. Because I got a kid going off in my class. I don't care about proactive. I need to handle it now. So I look forward to today and finding out some different interventions for them to do that so that we can pull them in more to be more proactive.
Absolutely. And that's why we focus hardcore on the proactive side, is because the reactive side becomes much easier if you have social capital with your kids, right? Like if your kids like you and you like them and you respect them and they respect you, no matter how much you like them, no matter how much they like you, they're going to act out sometimes, right? Because we're not going to nicely trauma out of kids, right? But we can build relationships to the point where we're starting to reframe and change some of those synapses and some of that damage that is caused by trauma with that neuroplasticity. And I'm throwing around these big words, not to sound fancy, but it is just, your brain can actually recover and your brain actually can to start rebuilding when you have those relationships with adults in your school, right? Unfortunately, people don't realize that we're not going to punish the trauma out of kids, right? Like you're not going to punish the trauma out of a kid. Nothing you're going to do with shaming, embarrassing, and exclusion is going to make a kid of trauma be more likely to act well for you or act good for you, right? So yeah, and today we are going to talk about a lot about the reactive side, but the reactive side again is going to be trauma informed. It's going to be equitable. It's going to be consistent and stuff like that with our discipline today. But it's going to work much better. Like if you just do this and you don't do the proactive side with our kids, it's still a whole lot better than what we're doing. In most cases, but combined with the proactive stuff, it's game changing. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome. Does anyone want to add to what Carol had said, or has something that your group discussed, or that something's going on in your school that you have thought about since last time? Not everyone can go at once. And I get it. We're a little bit tired. We're a little bit tired. But if you do have something that you'd like to share, maybe not verbally in front of the group, if you want to put something in the chat that maybe you thought about, that would be good too, in case you don't want to share in front of the whole group. All right. Yeah, Aaron, what was the question? Sorry, I was talking to a student. Isn't that crazy though? Like, you are in a school, right? So you're going to have distractions today. You're going to have things that come at you. It's like the whole school doesn't stop because we're in a training, right? So that's the interesting thing about doing PD while you're at your school. The question was, what have you thought about since the last time we met? Like the last time we met, we talked about the practice strategies. What have we thought about since then? What have we tried since then? What would we like to try since then? Kind of thing. So again, if you didn't want to say anything out loud, you are more than welcome to put something into the chat that has to do with that. All right, I'm going to reshare my screen. All right, pop quiz. Please put your answer in the chat. How many decisions does an educator make per day, do you think? It's like yes, no, you can, you can't. I'm going to teach this. I'm not going to teach that. Like an actual decision. It's not how many thoughts you have. It's how many yes, no, making a choices thing do you have in a day. Go ahead, put them in the chat. What do you think? Seeing the limit does not exist. 300, 1,000. 1,500, 500 plus, 100. Go ahead and keep on putting those in the chat. So when you think about the number of decisions you make in a day, they've actually done research on this. Like they actually collected data on this. You might think you're making a lot of decisions in a day. They figured out the teachers make between 1,500 and 1,600 decisions per day. 1,500 to 1,600 decisions per day. So when you think about that, there's a famous meme or famous quote that says that teachers are making more decisions per day than a brain surgeon is. Like you're making more decisions than a brain surgeon does. And of course, you know, they make a bad decision, it's not going to go well, right? If you're doing brain surgery, stuff like that. But it's about how hard your brain's being worked each day. When you go home, no wonder you're exhausted, right? You're exhausted because you had to make 15 to 1,600 decisions. So when you go home, you're like, man, what am I gonna make for dinner, right? You don't want to have to think about what you have to make for dinner because you're so exhausted going home that day. Mom, can I do this? I don't even want to think about that. Like, let dad answer, or I don't want to think about that. Let mom answer. So when you go home, you've made so many decisions that your brain is literally fried that day. So this is why your job is so exhausting, right? It's not just that, but it's the number of times you have to make a decision in a day that's really hard. So do keep that in mind with our educators, with our teachers, that they have to make a whole lot of decisions each day. So the reason why I brought that up is that we want to do stuff to make our teachers' jobs easier and our administrators' jobs easier. So hopefully we're making a little bit less decision making, right, in your day. One of the ways we do that is what we call collective commitments in our school. I have seen collective commitments from your PBIS models, and they're great, but very rarely have I seen them being used in actual classrooms instruction, actual classroom redirections. I see collective commitments on your walls. I see collective commitments on your website. I hear collective commitments on the announcements, but I very rarely see them actually used in the classroom. You know what I mean? And we're going to talk about what that looks like to use these, because these commitments that you might already have with your PBIS models, we need to use them in redirecting students when behavior occurs. And I'm going to tell you how that works. So like I said, 1,500 to 1,600 decisions per day. So when we talk about our collective commitments, something I want you to keep in mind is that we come up with these decisions about what our pillars are for our PBIS and all that kind of stuff. What I want you to consider, however, is that when you use something like be respectful, that's your PBIS pillars, be respectful. That's the expectation of your school, is to be respectful. From what perspective of respect are you referring to? And that's hard for us to hear, because our version of respect is not always the students and the family's version of respect. It's not always our culture's version of respect. So if you think about what respect looks like in your school, if you're a white male, a white female versus a black male versus a black female versus a Latino male, right? Does respect mean the same in every culture? Because I don't think it does. Example, look me in the eye. Make eye contact when I'm talking to you. I'm yelling at a kid and telling him to look me in the eye. In some cultures, looking me in the eye is not respectful. That's a sign of disrespect, right? Respect is having your clothes a certain way. Respect is having your hair a certain way. Respect is doing this and that. I want you to consider, when you come up with your expectations, if they are inclusive of who is actually in your school and what that looks like. So if you don't have people of, if you have mostly a Caucasian staff, which most schools do in the US, you better darn well have people of color taking a look at your expectations and being in that room, and not just being in that room, but helping lead, right? Because it's something that's very important for us, is that there's a disconnect between cultures. And that's why sometimes we have more kids of color coming through our offices, through our doors, is because there's not the same understanding of this kind of stuff, right? So I do want you to keep that in mind. It's something that I didn't think about when I first started my career, but it's something by the time the end of my career happened, I realized that something had to change with what I thought. The other thing with the expectations or rules that you have is you want to avoid deficit thinking and language. You have, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that kind of stuff going on. So in your school, you might have your pillars, but in classroom 1 in science, they have a syllabus with 19 rules. In classroom 2 in history, they have a syllabus with 42 rules. You have PE, it has 1 rule. You have math, it has 75 rules. Your kids are asked to switch gears, if you're in the middle school or high school, 7 to 10 times a day. That'd be like you all as administrators working in one school for an hour, going to a different school with different staff for an hour, going to a different school with different staff for an hour, and each time you're expected to be successful. Each time, like no matter how many times you change school buildings that day, you're expected to know how to act, know what to do, know what to say, and know the expectations. So this is extremely important, critical, that when we have expectations in our school, they are as universal as possible, because it's really confusing for a kid, not only to be doing a science lab in the morning, they have their beakers out, then they put away their beakers and they go and run a mile, and then they go to math class and do equations, and then they go and learn about World War II. No wonder the kids are a little bit frazzled, right? No wonder there's some inconsistency issues. The other thing is pick your battles. You have a pet peeve as a teacher. You have a pet peeve as a teacher. You have a pet peeve as an administrator, and they're all different. What is actually important in school? So what's the difference? When we have our list of rules, we have a list of things that we shouldn't do or that we should do in schools, right? Collective commitments, however, that is, when we're thinking about it, what are we gearing students towards? What are we coaching them towards? What should they be doing, in other words, right? It's not about what they should not be doing, it's what they should be doing. And if you have in your school already collective commitments, like you have your PBIS, be respectful, be responsible, so forth and so on, you're already at a good starting point. But that's not enough. You can't just have those expectations on your wall. So why are rules not the best? Deficit thinking. It's about what not to do. It's about all the things that you shouldn't do. There's a lot of rules in schools. There's a lot of rules in law and things like that, but there's a whole lot of loopholes. For example, walk on the right-hand side of the hallway. The student turns around this way and walks backwards, but they're walking backwards on their right-hand side of the hallway, right? Like students spend more time bending and breaking rules than actually following them sometimes, right? Especially your students that you see a lot in your office and stuff like that. You can't cover everything. Don't do this, don't do that. And it doesn't focus on coaching. If your rule is don't run with scissors, then that's not focusing on coaching. Like what should you be doing in that moment instead of running with scissors? So we're going to get into what this looks like, but it's going to be really, really important when we talk about redirecting students towards what we want them to be doing in our class. And that's what we're going to focus on in just a little bit. Hold on 1 second, just muting. All right. So expectations are different than rules. You need a handbook that says kids can't bring a gun to school, kids can't bring drugs to school, and stuff like that. I understand you need a handbook, you need codes, and you need school board policies and stuff like that. But even those are not restorative in a lot of cases. But this has nothing to do with your handbook. This is the day-to-day operations of your school and how your students function in classrooms with your teachers and with your staff. So when we talk about expectations, they cover as many potential things as possible. So for example, be respectful, that can mean a whole lot of things. So instead of saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, be respectful covers a whole lot of rules, right? If possible, they're co-constructed. If you're in an elementary school, one classroom can co-construct expectations together, and the teacher can synthesize all of the things that it looks like to be successful in class with your class. And then the teacher can synthesize those into just 5 things that are all positive, proactive, and things like that. If they're not in an elementary school, if you're at a middle school or a high school, you need to have co-constructum with your staff. So your staff should be involved in helping develop what the expectations are, but they have to have the criteria of proactive, positive, and coaching opportunities and things like that. When you look at this, don't get caught up in the small things. Like, don't put in there like little tiny minuscule pet peeves, because those can be covered by a broader expectation. And I'm gonna show you an example of what these look like too. My favorite one, you all might have a PBS model, but you might be missing this one. This is the one, like, we only had 3 when I was a high school principal, just 3. This was one of the 3 and my absolute favorite one, and one that happens to be missing. Engage in productive work. Engaging in productive work in class, okay? That covers cell phones, that covers talking while the teacher's talking, that covers not turning around your desk, that covers social media being up, that covers your Minecraft players and stuff like that. It's pretty straightforward, right? Like, anything other than being engaged and being productive is not following that expectation. So this one right here encompasses a whole lot of things, right? So a teacher might have the rules on the right-hand side. The reality is they only need one expectation to cover literally hundreds of rules right there. You might alternatively have like being responsible could cover some of these things, but we like to have engage in productive work because it's very specific, but it covers the gamut of things they might or might not do. This is a school that I work with in Illinois, around the Chicago area. They have just 4 expectations, and you all might have your own 4, and that's cool. You can see they have clearly defined on the right-hand side some bullet points as to what we mean by these. But here's the important part of this. This is in their hallway. That's great. But is this in every classroom in the entire school? If I were to walk into any classroom in this entire school, would these same things be posted on their walls? In every school I visited, almost, except for this one school, that was not the case. If you have these expectations, they should be in every classroom in your entire school. They should be at every bathroom in your entire school. They should be in the hallways, everywhere. Because this is just wallpaper, if not. Like, kids don't care about this sign. How do you actually use these in the classroom and when you redirect kids is where we're gonna go with this. But that makes sense though, right? Like, if you're in your classrooms, if you were walking through your classrooms, would you see this up on their walls? And if you did, would it be a place where we can actually see it, or is it just kind of like somewhere off to the side? So in these things, we actually have a chapter in our book. It's called Throwing Out the Rules, which is chapter 4. That does give you an example of how you might co-construct these with students. But you all heard me right though. If you're at the middle school or high school and the kids are changing classes all the time, it has to be a collective school-wide thing. If you're at the elementary level, you can also do these collective and school-wide, because the kids still go to art, right? The kids still go to PE, the kids still go to the cafeteria, the kids still go into the buses and stuff like that. So what I want you to do, we're gonna have a little breakout. I want you to talk to each other about whether or not you have collective commitments or expectations. They're universal. I want you to talk about the fidelity of these expectations being universal throughout your entire building. How are teachers using these? How are educators using these? And if they're not, think about ways in which you might do this and you might go about this. But I want you to talk about the expectations in your school and the consistency and what you do currently at your school, and be vulnerable. Like, if you're not really doing this yet, just be vulnerable. You might hear some ideas from others. So I'm gonna put you all in a little breakout room again. We're just gonna talk about our expectations in our school, how they work, how consistent they are, and that kind of stuff. So please do join the breakout room. I have just assigned it. Let's see, and Faith, I will put you in a room in just a second. Let's see, we're all back. So we had a little bit of a discussion in our groups. Would anyone care to share out the gist of it? Like, did anything anyone said was profound? Did you have anything that you'd like to share to the whole group as a whole? Like, what was the gist of your conversation that you had? How are those expectations going to your school currently, or somebody else's school that you heard? So would anyone like to share out loud or in the chat?
I think most schools, you know, with PBIS and everything, have the common expectations. Most schools have some sort of mascot and have, you know, like we're the Bulldogs and we have paws, and so our common promote respect and act responsibly and all that stuff. We have those that goes along with that. Pretty much everywhere, though, I think you could probably tighten up on the consistency. I mean, we have school-wide rules that, you know, you have expectations for the gym, for the hallway, for bathroom, classroom, and everything, but there are probably some classrooms that have different rules than others and stuff that probably could be tightened up.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Aaron. And that's what I've heard. Most schools I talk to, it's kind of like that as well. And in a lot of cases, most elementary schools I talk to have it. Some middle schools do, few high schools do. And that's just my experience overall. And we tend to forget that high school kids need consistency too. Even more so than when they're younger, in my opinion, because they're big and they have beards and they have, you know, they have all this stuff going on. They look like an adult, but they're not. Like their brain's not fully developed until they're what, 25, 23, 27. And all that. And we even see adults right now that are not acting the best, right, towards each other. We see adults in society doing all kinds of crazy things right now, and their brains are developed. So anyone else like to share? Thank you, Aaron, for sharing that. Anyone else? And again, you can share in the chat if you don't feel comfortable saying it aloud. Anyone agree or disagree with Aaron? Or want to add something to what he said or have something different?
For E-Town, in our group, we talked about earlier, I had asked when you mentioned middle and high school, that's our biggest struggle. So we're there, we have expectations, and I was telling them that at our elementary schools, we do a good job about teaching them and teaching them regularly and consistently, and teachers using the language. But middle and high school, not as much. And I think you are right. It's because they think they should already know.
Mhm.
So we keep going from the direction to tell them that things have changed so much. They know what they know at home and how things are taught. So if we never teach it to them on how we expect them to behave here at school, they're just going to do what they know, which is how to respond. If they scream and yell at home, they're going to scream and yell. And maybe it's not anger, it's just that that's how they talk. So, you know, if we don't teach it to them, then they're just going to do what they know. And so it is difficult in trying to get middle and high school teachers. But when I was asking them in our group, and the biggest piece Anna had talked about was that, you know, getting administration to really try and lead that is going to be huge. So, in getting them to lead it.
Absolutely. If your administrator's not on board, it's really hard to have school-wide anything, right? So the administrator needs to lead the charge. The administrator needs to do this and that because, you know, it's one of those things where we're not telling everyone what to do. That's why we collectively have commitments and we collectively do these things. But really, the kids are the ones that lose out when every classroom they go to is completely different ecosystem, completely different environments and things like that, right? And that's where we see a lot of problem behaviors with those inconsistencies. Well, thanks for saying that. Did anyone else want to add anything to what was said or have anything additional, either in the chat or?
I was in the group with Carol as well. And one of the things that we talked about was that in Warren County, I feel like the schools that we see the most success with PBIS are the schools that see it as a framework for everything they do and how they do business at school.
Mhm.
When schools see it as one more thing, it tends to not be it's not implemented with fidelity. As when the schools that have, you know, they have that mindset of this is the framework of how we do business at school.
Absolutely. And you're 100% correct, is people seeing things as one more thing. But what we're trying to talk about today are things that are going to make your job easier. You know what I mean? Like that's what I'm trying to get the message across to people, is that your job will be easier when kids know the deal. and no matter if they're in math or they're in English, it's the same deal. And there is autonomy that we have because our personality is our autonomy. You know, how we teach things, how we build relationships can be autonomy, but there has to be some sort of structure school-wide. or it's just going to be seriously confusing for our kids. And we're going to talk about how and why this is going to be even more important when it comes to behaviors and redirecting them as well. All right, we are going to take our first break because it has been a little bit more than an hour or an hour or so since we actually got started. We're going to come back at 50 after, so 9:50, depending on if you're in Central Time, maybe 9:50, if you're in Eastern, maybe 10:50. Please step away from your computer if you can, give yourself a little bit of break so we don't have that Zoom fatigue. But we're going to come back in about 10 minutes at 50 after, and we're going to get into the reactive side of discipline, which I know you've been waiting for, but that's what we're getting into next. So go ahead and turn off your screen, mute yourself if you want to, and step away from your computer. I'll see you all back at 10:50 or 9:50 Central. We are going to resume where we were. Just in case you were wondering about lunch, we're going to take our lunch break around 11:30 Central Time. I know you might have been wondering that. We are going to take an hour for lunch when we do take our break for lunch. So again, that'll be at 11:30 Central Time. All right, but welcome back. I hope that you had a good break, got a chance to step away. I know there's maybe fires in your building somewhere, or fires in your email somewhere, and all that kind of other fun stuff. So we're going to start talking about some of the reactive stuff, what that looks like, how we can use it. My hope is that some of this stuff you can use right away, and you can start implementing with your teachers and your staff this year. And also there's some things that you might see that are going to take a little bit longer to implement in your school. I want to give you the gist of it, the overview of it, and all that kind of stuff, so you can start to begin to thinking about how you might use it in your school and in your location. And again, you're not going to do it all at once. It's not possible, but do keep that in mind. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to cover is not exactly as it is in the book. So do keep in mind that you can take screenshots, take notes, whatever you need to do when you look at this. But reminder, a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is stuff that we've learned since the book came out. So if you read the book only, you're going to miss some of this stuff that I'm going to be talking about. So again, take notes, take screenshots, whatever you need to do with this new material. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite things first, because when we talk about discipline in schools, the thing that we tend to focus on and the things we tend to think about are, okay, what do I do when a student does this? What do I do when a student does that? It's very reactive. It's not, what are better consequences I can give instead of suspending a kid or instead of expelling a kid? The reality is that we need to do more preventative measures so we're not getting kids in our offices that are being suspended, that are being referred, and things of that nature. What I'm about to tell you, if every teacher in your building did it, you would have a whole lot less kids coming through your doors in the admin office. So this is a strategy that is kid-facing, teacher and adult delivered. So do keep that in mind. It is something we need to use directly with kids, and this is a very powerful strategy. Our book talks about chapter 6 about mindfulness and things like that in a student-facing way. What we would teach the students to do. What I'm about to tell you is the adult-facing way. So we have to actually walk the walk and talk. We can't just talk the talk. We're going to walk the walk in how we interact with our kids. So when we're thinking about our kids and our classes and things like that, we need to think about what we're seeing. And we're seeing sometimes more immature behaviors, more big behaviors than we've ever seen in our careers this early on, right? We're seeing May behaviors in October kind of stuff. So it's even more important now to do this kind of thing. The thing I want you all to consider and to think about when we're working with our kids is what we call meta moments. So when we think about a meta moment right here, and when we're thinking about how we might work with our kids, we have to think about this. We're very, very quick to react when we see something, because not only are the kids more agitated, not only are the kids more distracted, not only are the kids less able to pay attention for long periods in a row, the adults in your building are also more touchy. The adults in your building are also more reactive. The adults in your building have also undergone stress and trauma and the pandemic and all that stuff. So it is possible that the adults in your school are more quickly reacting to kids than they would have traditionally done 3 years ago, right? Like you might be seeing that, right? Like your educators are also on edge. Your educators are also stressed in addition to your kids. So do keep that in mind. When we see a behavior in class or when we see a behavior in the cafeteria, it's critical that we use what's called a meta moment. We have to take just a brief moment between we see a behavior and when we react to the behavior. We have to take a pause. We have to, because if we don't, the second I see a kid talking to another kid and I snap, the second I see a kid get up when they're not supposed to get up, I snap. I'm going to say something that I shouldn't. I'm going to use the wrong tone. I'm going to assume something that isn't actually there. I need to slow myself down in the classroom. I need to slow myself down in my school when it comes to kids and their behaviors. Take just a moment. It's called a meta moment. And this is from Yale, as far as like they coined the term meta moment. But I'm going to show you what this looks like in actuality in a student situation. So I see a behavior in class that, you know, maybe I don't like. I could be kids talking, could be a kid on Minecraft. It could be a kid getting up during the middle of my lesson. It could be anything. When you see that behavior, or you think at least you see that behavior, there's going to be a 4-step process before I actually do anything with the kid. And again, if your teachers do this, you're going to have a whole lot less explosions from kids that are oppositional. And you're going to have a whole lot less teachers making mistakes when it comes to saying things that they shouldn't. The first thing that you're going to do when you see a behavior is just pause. And the whole thing is planned. PLAN, this is the P part, which is pause. I want you to do a coping skill that works for you to make sure that you are present in the moment. And here's some examples of this. You might take a couple of deep breaths. That's the simplest and easiest one that I teach people, is to take 5 deep breaths, 10 deep breaths, whatever they want to use. It's cool. I'm going to take a deep breath when I see a student do a behavior before I say anything. This reminds me not to just act. You can do pleasant imagery where you simply close your eyes for a second and pretend like you're at the beach or you're at grandma's house or you're at some place that makes you happy for just a few seconds, then do something. One of the easiest ones is counting backwards from 5 or from 10. There's psychology behind it. If you count forwards, you're just trying to rush through it. But when you count backwards, you have to think a little bit harder and it's more intentional. So you might go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's also a weird thing that my co-author Nathan talks about. I don't do it, but you might like it. But you take your finger, you put it on this little area beneath your nose and above your lip. I forgot the name of the area on the face, but it's right here. You take your tongue and you press your tongue against the finger in your mouth. So you don't lick your finger because that'd be really weird, right? But you rub your tongue against your finger for just a few seconds, like back and forth 3 times. Try it. It's a little bit weird. Try it. Like put your finger right here and just take your tongue and put some pressure on that finger from inside your mouth. It's really weird, but it actually works. I have a pen when I was teaching, and I always carried a pen around with me because I didn't know what to do with my hands when I taught. Like if I didn't have something in my hand, I was like talking to kids and I was like, what do I do with my hands? So I always had a pen with me because that was like a kind of like a comfort thing. So when I had a pen, I click it like 3 times. That was my coping strategy, is to click my pen a few times before I act. You have to pick what's good for you. So after I do this, I do something quick. It only takes a second or 2. I'm going to listen to my body. Am I breathing heavy at this moment in time? Is my pulse racing? Am I escalated? Because if I'm escalated, I probably shouldn't say anything at that moment in time, right? You're not going to say anything good if you're escalated. It's just not going to happen at that moment in time. You have to reflect. What is your body doing? What is your trigger? Am I clenching my fist? Am I clenching my jaw? Is my heart racing? Like, what is my body doing? So take just a brief second, listen to your body real quickly. After that, so I've paused. I have done my deep breath or whatever I need to do. I've counted backwards or whatever I need to do. I thought about my body. What is my body doing? Because I'm not going to do anything if my body is not in sync with myself. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask myself, am I checking my implicit biases? This is important. A lot of times, I look at a student of color if I'm white, and if I'm Black or African American, I might look at a student that is the opposite race of me too. It's implicit bias, everyone has it. But what we tend to see is we see our students of color doing the negative things because we're looking for those negative things. It's not intentional, like we're not like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to be racist right now. It's just when I look at two students, am I actually looking at the student of color and seeing them do something that the student next to them is also doing, but I'm seeing them first? Are your eyes drawn to a student of color? Because you better make sure that if that's the person that's doing it, no one else is doing it too. Or maybe they're not actually doing anything at all, but your eye was drawn to them in that moment in time. You got to think about that. Before you act, you have to think about it. Is that a student that is somebody that is marginalized? Is that a student that is the opposite race or culture of me? It doesn't mean they get away with whatever they want. It just means we have to think about it for a second, because a lot of the time, we don't give a benefit of the doubt to the opposite race as us or the opposite gender of us. Heck, in schools, at the elementary schools I work with, 75% of the referrals on average are boys. You know what most of the teaching staff is in elementary schools? Females, right? You have to also imagine, am I assuming? Did I actually hear that? Did I actually see that? Or do I think I saw that? Or am I assuming that I heard that? Is the kid actually doing what I think that they're doing? And lastly, what am I hoping to get from this interaction? Am I trying to embarrass the kid? Am I trying to call that kid out in front of their friends? Am I trying to be sarcastic with this kid? Or am I actually just trying to redirect their behavior? Because me personally, I've embarrassed kids before, especially earlier in my career. Gee, thanks so much for showing up to class when they were 3 minutes late. Susie, I asked you 3 times now to get off there, and it's in front of the entire class. Like, what am I hoping to get from my next interaction with that kid? If it's to embarrass them, stop and don't do it. Like, that's not your intention. That's not what you need to be doing at that moment in time. So I've paused. I took a deep breath or two. I've come backwards or whatever I needed to do. I looked at my body. I felt my body for a second. And then I looked and I thought, okay, am I checking my biases? Am I assuming? What am I hoping to get? All of this happens in a matter of seconds. I'm talking about it slowly, but it becomes like muscle memory. I even have plan on my teacher lanyard when I was teaching in school. Like, that's how I remembered the steps right there. So after I've done these things, I have to then decide next. This is the action step. Should I just keep on monitoring them? So they worked, Susie was talking to Antoine, but was it so distracting that I have to stop my entire class right now? Was it so distracting, or was it just a quick thing? I'm just gonna keep an eye on it, but I'm not gonna do anything yet. But I have it in my head to check again in a little bit, right? Should I do something now? Should I actually give a warning? Should I actually give a preview of the expectation? Should I actually go out of consequence? Or I am going to do something and have a conversation or do a consequence. I'm just going to do it later, because the reality is that that kid is on Minecraft right now. And yes, that's not great, but is it worth stopping my entire class to get that kid off of Minecraft right now? Or can I talk to him about it in 5 minutes when I'm not talking in front of the class again? So you have to decide what you're actually going to do in this moment in time. Sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it's something, sometimes it's something later. But you have to choose the next step with that kid right there. So think about this in this situation with kids. Has there been a situation with your students or in your school where either you or another adult didn't do any of the steps I just mentioned, and they just said something to a kid? They just did something to a kid, and it didn't go the best. So think about a situation in your career or a situation that you've seen in your school. If you feel vulnerable, I'd love if you'd unmute yourself to talk about a situation that you screwed up, because I've screwed up a lot of situations with kids. I'd also love if you're vulnerable and put it in the chat if you didn't feel like saying it out loud to everyone. But what are some situations where you feel like could have gone better that you've either seen or you've done yourself? That if you had done these things, it might have gone a little bit better.
I had worked in an alternative school prior to where I am now. And there was a teacher that there was a kid that was having some behaviors, was struggling, and the teacher had walked behind the student and put his hand on the student's back. And to try to calm him down instead of just stopping. And the child has PTSD. So it just really escalated the situation completely. And I think this would have been a really good thing for this teacher to have. But then, the teacher overreacted and started yelling and was attempting to put the child in a hold, which escalated it even more. So I feel like this would have been really good for that teacher to know. And then once everything was said and done, and I had showed up, because I'm a therapist, so when I had showed up, I just said, please do not touch him. That is one of his triggers. The teacher apologized, and I think that kind of helped the relationship, and he knew he had done something he shouldn't have done, and he just didn't stop to think.
Absolutely. And a lot of our kids have triggers that we're not aware of, or we don't think of, or it's just our instinct to do something quickly without thinking about it. This would give us a chance to think about, in that moment, is this kid going to react in this way about what I'm going to do? But yeah, that's just not a good situation, right? Like putting a kid in a hold is never a good situation unless the kid is literally getting violence and hurting himself and others and stuff like that. And even then it's, looked down upon and stuff like that. So that's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to add to that, or have anything that they've seen happen or they've done themselves that if they had used these strategies, maybe it wouldn't have happened or gotten that deep with the kid or escalated that quickly?
Hey, Brad, it's Tabitha from E-Town. Just looking at listening to what you said, we probably struggle a lot with the thing that recognizing our own biases, because like you said, most of our boys of African-American, background or ethnicity, they're usually louder. So yesterday, we had new classes started, and one of my little African-American boys is loud, and he was talking or something, and he's the one getting sent out. So we are struggling with that. Not that we're trying to be racist or anything like that, but I guess I need to look at how we can help teachers really understand their biases. But this might be one of the ways too that we could implement and hopefully keep those kids in class and not have those kinds of disciplinary actions.
Yeah, and there's a lot of misunderstandings and stereotyping and associations and stuff like that happens with our kids, right? And we tend to think that the dominant culture or the white supremacy culture is the right way of being sometimes, right? Like that's just because we created the rules, the schools, the procedures, the politicians, right? Like that's who created the rules and how things should be. So an awareness of that and and you are right. And then a lot of cases, teachers will look at a kid that is talking and another kid that is talking, but they will point out or be drawn to the kid that is of a different race than them in that situation. So it is understanding that it is the culturally responsive teaching, the cultural awareness and stuff like that. But you got to wonder, like, a study I'd love to be seen done. I don't know of any school in the nation or the world that has a predominantly staff of color with a predominantly Caucasian student body. It's typical, I'd love to see a study to see if that actually panned out, because in our schools, it's predominantly white or Caucasian staff with students of color, and there's disproportionality going on there. Also, I'd love to see an elementary staff that was mostly male, and see if there was also pervasive, disproportionality in male referrals and things like that. But I don't know if you all have ever seen that happen in either case, but the only schools that I've ever seen of predominantly staff of color had predominantly students of color in their student body, right? I have yet to see a school that is mostly white or Caucasian have a mostly staff of color staff. So I'm wondering if that would still happen, right? Like, would we still have disproportionality in a school, but would it be towards the students that were Caucasian? You know what I mean? Like, that's something that I've never seen. So if you all know of a school like that, I would love to go and do a study on that kind of thing. But it so happens to be that most of our teachers are Caucasian, and that's just nationwide. And we're trying to do a better job of getting, of making the student body more reflective in our staff and stuff like that. But it's hard because there's less students of color graduating and going to college because there's a lot of barriers that are involved in their schooling, right? And a lot of people, I mean, think about it. Who would go into the teaching profession if you had a bad experience in school, or if you were marginalized in school, or you had negative interactions in school, or if you were suspended from school or your friends were, right? So that's just something systemically we need to work on as a society as well. But yeah, absolutely. Like, we got to think about that, especially with that implicit bias thing. We've all done it. It's not intentional, but when we think about it, did I actually call out that kid versus another kid because I expected them to be louder? I expected them to be this way, or were they actually doing something wrong? And that's a huge step in that discipline process. Anyone else have anything that happened to them, or want to add on to any of the stories you've heard? And again, you can add it to the chat, or you can unmute yourself. All right, I'm seeing a chat. So, all right, never mind. That's not something both missed. All right. So what I'd like to ask you all, do you have a different coping strategy than the one I mentioned? Like, the first part is the coping strategy. Like, even if you don't remember the L, A, and N part, the meta moment or the pause, if your teachers just did that, things would go a lot better, if nothing else. Does anyone else have a different coping strategy that they use personally besides the pen click, the counting backwards, the deep breaths? Does anyone have another go-to that they use? Now, if you remember, Kelly, you remember, we learned a good one yesterday. You remember it, Kelly?
Yes, I do. It was push, pull, flop. Is that it?
Push, pull, flop. Yep, that's it.
Okay.
And I love it. I've never heard that before, and it was so good. Push, pull, flop. So let's all do it real quick because it was so good that I want you to experience it. And it's something that you can do pretty easily. I want you to, you're in your seat, which is where you should be. You can also do it while standing, but it's a little bit harder. So I want you to push down on your seat, like you're trying to push your chair through the ground. Like you're gonna act like you're actually trying to push your chair through the ground. We're gonna push down for 5 seconds. And you have to stay seated. Don't stand up, stay in your current seat. I want you to push down and hold it for 5 seconds. Ready? Push down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next, take your hands and put them underneath your chair. Now we're gonna stay seated and lift. We're gonna act like we're trying to lift ourselves. We're trying to lift our chair off the ground while sitting in it. So don't use your legs, just use your hands though. We're gonna lift on our chair and pull up for 5 seconds. Ready? Pull up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The last step, hold it and flop. Let go. Just let go. Relax for a second. Flop. And my favorite part of that is the flop part because it's just kind of silly. But if you just push on your chair, push down, pull up on your chair and flop, just that little break in your brain causes you to make a better decision. And I'm trying to think if I was standing in the classroom, I might like push down while I'm standing, like see if I can push my feet through the floor and see if I can keep my feet flat and lift myself up a little bit and then just relax my shoulders. So I could try it while standing. It's not as effective, but that's one of my favorite ones. And again, I learned that from somebody that I was with yesterday, which is awesome. And that's the fun part about this job, is sharing these strategies with you all. All right. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of reactiveness and the nitty gritty of what we're going to do when kids do act out, because even though we paused, we listened to our body, we checked our biases, and then we decided what to do next. What we decide to do next is going to be paramount. Like when we do inside, I just taught you what to do before you engage with the kid. I'm going to teach you what to do after you decide I am going to engage with that kid. So that next part, I decided to do something. This is what we're going to talk about next. But in order to do that, we have to reflect on what we're already doing in our school. So what are you already doing with the discipline practices in the classrooms when a kid acts out? What is prevalent in your school right now? Because we have to be reflective of that if we're going to replace some of those strategies with new ones. So have you all tried a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats before? Like have you done this with your staff, or done this with your kids, or done this with your teachers? So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to talk about in our group in just a second the strengths. So if you have the ability to take a screenshot of this right here, because you're going to need to know some of this going into your chat room. So if you want to take a picture with your phone, or if you want to take a picture on your camera, or if you want to jot it down real quick, we are going to talk about this in our breakout room. So it'd be much easier if you did have this. So again, take a picture with your phone, take a screenshot with your computer, write it down real quick, because when you go into the breakout room, unfortunately, you can't see my screen anymore. When you're in your breakout room, I want you all to discuss some of these things with each other. I'm gonna freshen up the breakout rooms. We're gonna be with different people this time, just so we get some new perspectives. I want you to talk about in your school, when a student acts out, generally, what are the good things that already are happening when a student acts out? What are the things that aren't going so great when a student acts out, either in your classroom or your school? What could you do a little bit better that you're not doing as a school? And what are the threats? Like, what's something that you're going to have a hard time overcoming? It can be funding, it can be time, it can be something that you would have a really hard time to change right there. So if everyone has a picture of this, or at least somebody in your group does, this is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to have about 10 minutes to be vulnerable with each other. Like what's going well, what isn't going so well with your current discipline practices when students are acting out in your school. So I am going to open up the breakout rooms. Again, I'm going to recreate them. I'm going to, I believe I put you into different places this time. I'm just double checking that. It is possible you might have a few of the same people. All right, ready? I've just opened your room. Again, make sure you take a snapshot or a screenshot before you head to your room. When you have that screenshot, go ahead and go with your group. The rooms will close. If you're back, the rooms will close in about 20 seconds. So we'll resume in about 20 seconds or so if you happen to already be back. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had a good discussion. I was in and out of some of the rooms, hearing some of the things that were said, and it was phenomenal discussions. Is there anything that you heard that you thought, wow, that's a really good idea? Did you hear any strengths that any of the other schools were doing, or that somebody at your own school was doing that you're like, yeah, I really like that? Or did you find some common struggles with people who worked at other schools or even within your own school? So did you hear any good ideas that you want to look into or you thought were great? Or was there any common struggles that you all shared? And if you could unmute yourself, that'd be fantastic. But again, if you don't feel like talking in front of everyone, you can also put that into the chat. But I'd love to hear some of the strengths that were out there and some of the commonalities and what we're struggling with a little bit.
something that was brought up in our group was a strength of teachers really doing a good job of building relationships with students. They've been out of the building for so long, and we all know that relationships is 90% of what we do. And if we don't have those relationships, we're starting behind the 8 ball. Common struggles are, we're coming off a pandemic. Most teachers in most districts in Kentucky got a large sum of money, and they decided to buy a new curriculum, which is wonderful because we don't get that opportunity very often. But it's new curriculum, and it's both of your cores. It's reading and it's math, and they're having to learn that. Plus, they're expected to grow students 15 months in this school year. So teachers, I said, we're at the boiling point, that you can walk into, I serve 5 schools. I can walk into any of the 5 schools and you can tell that 99% of the faculty and staff are barely treading water.
Thanks for sharing that. That was, it's my impression too. I work with people all over the country, and I walk into a school and it's just a different feel than it was even 3 years ago. It really is, right? Like, and it's an interesting decision to buy a new curriculum when we're still trying to figure out the pandemic and all of the stuff and all the variables that go with that. So adding in a new variable to what we're already stressed about is interesting for sure, right? That's definitely an interesting choice. I'm going to do that for sure. But yeah, I mean, if you look on the faces of educators right now and teachers, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. And that's what I run into. It's like, I'm trying to help you with strategies that are gonna make your job easier, but it's still something different than I'm already doing and I already know, you know what I mean? So it's tough, but thanks for sharing that. It's tough. It's tough. Absolutely. I do see somebody in the chat had mentioned that, yeah, like amen to you. So much money spent and not always unworthy resources, which again, you know, we can only control what we can control from our position, and we don't make all the decisions and things like that. But it's also important that we talk to the educators in our school corporation and our schools to figure out what we think would be a good use. What do you think that they need? You know what I mean? Like, what could you use to make your job easier right now? And not everyone will probably have said that. Whatever was put. Absolutely. All right, anyone want to add to what she had said, Penny had said, or have anything else that you got out of your conversation? The gist of it, any strengths that you're like, wow, that's awesome, or any, wow, we're all also struggling with this too? No? Okay. So how about this? We can put it into the chat if you do come up with something. And again, just like this, right? Like just like this. Like, man, it is hard. It is hard right now to be thinking about new things. Absolutely. All right. So we talked about our strengths, our weaknesses. We did some reflection because I wanted you all to reflect before we learn something new, because you are probably doing some things that are going really well. And I want you all to think about that, because it feels like doom and gloom sometimes. It feels like the sky is falling sometimes, but never forget there's a whole lot of good things happening in your school. How can we enhance some of those things or replace some of those things and not add more things on top of? That's what we're trying to avoid here, right? We're trying to enhance or replace, but not to try to add more things on people's plates. And that is the overall goal. So I'm gonna share my screen again, just to make sure you all can see it. So when you talk about your students, opportunities and threats, a lot of people will say funding, staffing, the pandemic, you know, the students have been out of school for years. The parents aren't always on board with things and stuff like that. Absolutely, those are usually commonalities that we have. Sometimes people say a threat or a weakness is the mindset of people in the building. Like, people think that they want a pound of flesh when they get sent down to the office and stuff like that. Like, they want punishments for kids because that's how they grew up and that's how they taught. So sometimes it might be a mindset shift that's needed in a school or a corporation. When you're looking at how we punish kids, and I use that word punishment on purpose, we take away recess time, you know, we give them more homework, which is odd because they don't like homework. So we're gonna give them more of it, which is gonna make them hate it more, right? And that goes back to even writing sentences on the board, that old school thing. I don't like to write, so I'm gonna write, and I'm gonna punish kids by writing. It almost makes as much sense as making kids run as punishment in sports. Like, we're playing basketball, but I'm gonna make you do what's called a suicide drill, and make you run as a punishment when really we want you to like running because you're an athlete. You know what I mean? It's that same thing in the classroom as well. The loss of privileges or take stuff away, detentions, expulsions, referrals, suspensions, all that kind of stuff are the common punishments. But what we see in our data is that it doesn't change behaviors. If it does change behaviors, it's out of compliance, it's out of shame, it's out of something else. But what happens is the kids are not like, oh my gosh, I gotta shape up. No, the kids are now afraid to get in trouble again. They're intimidated, they're embarrassed. So that sense of belonging that they might have had dwindles. So yes, that kid no longer talks in your class, but that's because they don't like you anymore. That's because they're afraid of you. That's because they don't want to get in trouble, not because they all of a sudden realize that they were wrong. They need to change their ways and stuff like that. So you will see that very few kids come out of a detention or a suspension happier at school and more willing to engage at school. It's usually the opposite. They feel more withdrawn from school and things like that. And I'm gonna tell you this, and not every restorative practitioner will tell you this, but sometimes we do have to do suspensions or expulsions for safety reasons, right? Like, a kid brings a gun to school, we're not gonna say, oh, give me that and put him back in class next period and stuff like that. There will be cases where we have to take things more seriously and take into consideration the safety of the school and the staff, but we don't have to suspend them 5 days if they get in a fight versus 3 days versus 2 days. Like, I'm not gonna learn my lesson better in 5 days than in 3 days. It's more of an inconvenience to the parents, right? It's more like you're trying to get the attention of the parents sometimes with the suspension versus it actually is going to change the behavior from 5 days versus 3 days and so forth and so on. So that's what I find interesting for sure. Aaron commented when he started his job, he had to write sentences during detention. And that's one of the first things you changed. Thank you, Aaron, for changing that. Like that, that's just teaching kids to hate school, right? I'm punishing you with schoolwork. That's just not a good look right there. So do keep that in mind. If you are seeing that in your building, it's not a good look. It's going to get kids to hate writing and to hate school. I mean, that's just as plain as I can say it. So thanks so much for changing that. It's hard. If suspensions and expulsions worked, think about the prison system, which is what we're going to talk about next. Does anyone ever go back to jail after going in jail the first time? Or does everyone learn their lesson the very first time they get arrested? No one ever comes back to jail. No one gets arrested again, right? Or is it that it's not actually doing anything but punishing them? And the only reason that why they would be arrested, they're going to do a better job not getting caught next time, right? They're going to figure out what it was that got them caught and try to not do that again. Versus, is there some kind of reason why I have to live this life because I have no alternatives? Are we looking at what they're doing and their alternatives? Are we looking at, we're going to punish you when you get caught kind of system? So the justice system itself is very punitive in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of people out there that are looking at educate that prison reform, and restorative practices are also coming to the prison systems and have been in the prison systems. So when we think about restorative practices, which is the meat of what we talk about, if you look at this right here, restorative practices, a lot of people say they're too soft. The kids can do whatever they want. The kids are going to run the school. There's no consequences, right? You've all heard that, right? Or I don't have time for that kind of stuff. And I've heard that all. And I know that you've heard that all if you've had that discussion in your staff. The reality is, if you look at this definition, 3/4 of this definition is about accountability. Like almost the whole thing is about accountability. I would argue, you might not agree, you might agree. I would argue that restorative practices are more accountability, not less, when a behavior occurs. Can you imagine how easy it would be just to take a lunch detention versus having to clean the cafeteria and having to make amends with the custodian who you made their job harder that day? Can you imagine? Like, I would rather take my lunch detention and be out of lunch for one day than to have to clean the cafeteria and apologize to the custodian and hear about how it influenced their day. So we're going to talk about how it's actually more accountable, not less. And it's not punishing them better. It's teaching them through consequences what they should be doing next time, making them empathetic towards the people that they've harmed in some way, them learning social emotional skills and how to resolve conflict. It is more accountability. And that is my true belief, actually, not less. So what we're going to do, we've been on our computer for almost an hour again. We're going to take one brief break again, come back strong for about 35, 40 minutes, and then take a lunch. So I will see you all back at 40 or at 53 after. So at 10, actually 54. At 10:54, we're going to come back, step away from your computer if you can, and then we're going to do a little bit of stuff, and then we're going to head into our lunch break. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And again, we're going to start in just a second. I know that some people are returning back to their desk. And at 30 after, we will have our lunch break for an hour, and then we'll come back and finish up strong for the day. So we have about 35 more minutes or so before we're going to go on our lunch break. All right, so as I was saying before, we were talking about restorative practices, and we're going to get into some of those strategies we can use with our students. We got to keep in mind that this is something that you're going to have some pushback with your staff on. So what I hope is that with a better understanding of how this works, we can better answer those questions with our staff members that may or may not be on board or with it, be able to better verbalize and show them this is in fact something that holds students more accountable, not less. And the difference is that this will help with intrinsic change and help with students, learning from their mistakes versus repeating their mistakes, or not repeating their mistakes out of fear versus, shame, or actually feeling like, wow, I do need to make amends with who I harmed. So when we're thinking about students, we like to use a metaphor, and how we might think about this process is with our kids. So when you're thinking about students in your school, students in your classes, I want you to keep that in mind when I'm talking about this. So when we have a car in our garage, we think it's in a nice, safe place, right? We think that it should be protected from the weather and all of those things. So we bring out our car out of our garage after it's been sitting there for a bit. It has rust on it. And when a car has rust on it, we're like, okay, we should fix this rust. So we buff it out, we shine it, we repaint it, whatever we need to do, but we take care of that rust. And then when the car is on the road, it's fine, it's doing seemingly well. but then we put the car back into the garage. When we pull that garage, when we open that garage up, we pull the car back out, there's more rust on that car. And we go through the same process again. We shine it up, we paint it, we buff it out, and all those kinds of things. And the car drives and it looks nice. Then we put it back in the garage and the rust forms again and again and again. So what we're doing in this metaphor is we are continuously looking at the car. We're looking at the outward appearance of something, right? But we're not going back to why the car is forming rust again in the first place. In this case, water's coming in through the roof. So we need to go back and fix that roof and fix and help coach where the rust is forming in the first place, and look beneath behaviors and look and seek to understand behaviors instead of just looking at behaviors as a kid cussed me out and treating just that fact that the kid cussed me out. Besides digging deeper into the why behind the kid cussed you out, it doesn't mean that it's okay that a kid cussed you out, but it does mean that we're going to have to get to that reasoning in order to address it so that the kid doesn't cuss us out again and again and again. And each time they do it, we give them a punishment. And each time we do it, we give them a punishment. And it's just a vicious cycle where nothing changes in schools and with our students. So how do we treat the root cause of behaviors is a big part of restorative practices. When we look at suspensions at the high school level, like dropout behaviors began way before high school. I mean, dropout behaviors began very early on. They can start happening at the elementary level, to be honest. But the study that we found from the Everyone Graduates Center, it's really, really sad and disheartening when you look at suspensions. Just being suspended once, just one suspension has reduced, according to this study, the graduation rate of student body by 23% through one suspension. A kid who gets suspended once their freshman year. The college, the post-secondary attainment goes down, 19% in this instance. And the dropout rate between 0 suspensions and 1 suspension has doubled. That's with one suspension. It gets, worse and worse with the more suspensions and things like that. But you look at it, the 4 or more suspension rate, I mean, those kids, more than half of those kids are dropping out at that point. Only 1/4, if not less, are graduating, and very few are enrolling in post-secondary schools. So when you look at this, it's very eye-opening that suspensions are harmful to kids. They're not making them better. They're not making them more focused. In fact, kicking kids out of school doesn't do really any good. It only does the opposite, which is further marginalizing, further separating them from their peers and their successes, and putting them back into the neighborhood and the environment where they might not be in the best place to learn. So when I look at this data, it's pretty obvious that suspensions don't change behavior, because if suspensions change behavior, then the graduation rate would go up after one suspension, right? Like, wow, I learned my lesson. I'm gonna now be more focused on school. The opposite is that it creates this sense of disengagement. It creates this sense of hopelessness. It creates this sense of school is not for me kind of attitude. So when we do this, I want you to keep this in mind. Those suspensions, sometimes they have to be, like a kid punches a guy in the face, maybe we have to, but it doesn't have to be for 5 days. It doesn't have to be for 10 days. It might be shorter. If a kid brings a weapon, we might have to expel, and I get that. But we're suspending kids for minor behaviors in a lot of cases. We're suspending kids for being tardy. We're suspending kids for saying something to a teacher that they shouldn't, and other small things. And these are all contributing to the overall school to prison pipeline. It's contributing to the poverty levels of our students. And it's really causing a big change in, it's just not good. Like, I don't know how else to put it, but I want you to keep this in mind the next time we suspend a kid for a reason that is not a safety issue, especially. Instead, what we need to do and focus on is looking at behavior as a form of communication. And yes, it's hard to look at behavior as a form of communication when a kid flips you off, right? I mean, that is not easy to overlook, and we shouldn't overlook it, but we have to realize that there's something deeper there. It's usually not you. It's usually not us. There's something bigger going on with that kid. We need to seek to understand it. We need to figure out what it is. And we're going to hold them accountable, but it's going to be in a restorative way that actually changes behaviors versus just kicking kids out of school. So when we look at this success and how we're going to start working on this systemically in our schools and systematically in our schools, when we look at it, we're going to get really big into the school-wide expectations that we talked about a few minutes ago, or about a half hour ago or so. We talked about those expectations that you have with your PBIS. How do we actually use those in action in schools? Teacher clarity, like do teachers actually make it so that students understand what's next, what's happening, and what's expected of them and all that kind of stuff? Or is it very weird and wonky from one room to another? The other thing is our interactions. Kids are kids. Like that's what I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Kids are kids. Like they're going to do stuff that's not the best sometimes. They're going to make poor decisions sometimes. They're going to do things that are not the best. But what are we doing as the adults in the school that can minimize what happens with our kids? Can we make situations actually worse because our strategies are not helping the kids and not meeting the kids at their level where they're at currently? So let's talk about redirections and how this might work in your school with your current PBIS model or your current expectations that you have. And if you don't have those common expectations, I would strongly advise that that's one of the first things you start working on in your school. So I'm going to teach you how to use expectations that you have set. It could be the respect, responsibility kind of expectation types or whatever they are in your school. But how does that get used in the classroom for consistency purposes? So now we're at the point where we did the pause, like we did the pause. We did that, little, push, pull, flop strategy. We did the counting backwards strategy. We did some sort of, clicking 3 times on our pen strategy. We listened to our body. I just look at my hands when I'm listening to my body because my hands tell me a lot, whether they're clenched or not, whether they're like this, whether my teeth are grinding. We asked ourselves, is that kid a student that maybe is not doing something? Or is that a kid that maybe is doing the same thing as another kid? We asked ourselves the question. Then we decided next. Now I'm actually going to do something about the behavior that I'm seeing. So this is that next part. This is that part where you chose to engage and you chose to move forward with what you were trying to do with that kid. So I decided to act at this point. And when we do this, if this is happening the same way in every classroom in your school, guess what? You're going to have a whole lot of behaviors that are not getting to that next level in your school. You're going to have a whole lot more kids that know what the deal is. You're going to have a whole lot less kids that are saying, but so-and-so lets me do this kind of stuff. If your staff does this, this is going to solve a whole lot of your consistency issues in your school. It's not just about having consistent expectations. It's about using those expectations in a consistent way from classroom to classroom. So here's an example of what might happen in a school and in a class, or even in the cafeteria. I don't care where it's at. This is what we should do. This is tried and true. And it is something, again, it's one of the first things that when I go to a school and I work with the staff, it's one of the first things that I establish. So a kid's acting out in class. What we might do typically is say, John, stop doing that. Susie, get off your computer. Jerome, stop doing this. Like we might call the kid out in front of their class and their peers, and we might say, don't do this. That's the go-to. And that's what I did when I first started teaching as well. So here's what you do in class. Every single class period ever, I start my class period with a preview of my lesson that day. We restate the expectations. Remember everyone, the expectations today are that we are to be respectful, be responsible, and engage in productive work. I say that at the beginning of every lesson ever. I don't care how many, the kids need to hear it all the time. Okay, then we get into our lesson after we previewed it. We told them exactly what was happening in what order. We told them our expectations again. After a few minutes, you're teaching and you see a kid talking to another kid. And you have done your plan and you decided it's distracting enough that I'm going to act, okay? The first thing you do is you say to the entire class, as a reminder, everyone, the expectation is that we are to engage in productive work. Does anyone have any questions about that? It's that simple. You give everyone a big, broad reminder of the expectation. If you notice that it's more than one kid doing something, okay? I'm just putting it out there, and that way it's on everyone's mind. I am not looking at that kid that's on Minecraft. I am not hovering over that kid that is talking to that other kid. This is more of a big general announcement where no one's like, it's Susie, it's Susie. Like, we don't want people to be doing that, right? It's just a big general reminder. Then, okay, you're gonna see that those kids have not stopped talking. That kid has not stopped playing Minecraft. That kid has not gotten off their cell phone. The preview to the whole class is a tier 1 thing. Like, that's, everyone got it. And most of your kids at that point would put away their computer. And most of your kids at that point would have gone off their cell phone. And most of your kids at that point would have done what they need to do. But you all know, as I know, that there's going to be some kids that still don't do what they need to do at that point, right? It's going to happen, okay? So when we think about the preview, we clearly restated the expectation, like I said that in general. So in this example, we see kids on their cell phones, and I just simply say in a positive voice, not mean. Remember, class, we are to engage in productive work today. Engaging in productive work would mean all cell phones are put away and we are facing forward right now, or whatever it is. And again, this is something right here. I'm going to tell you this. Do not use your teacher one-on-one skill of standing near that kid, staring at that kid, being near that kid, or anything like that. We're trying to reduce opposition, because when you get near kids that are oppositional, they tend to get worse in their opposition. I'm going to tell you that. This is, I mean, people don't realize that. And yeah, it might make sense for some kids to stand near them when you say this, but your kids that are probably going to get to the point where they're not listening to your first warning are the kids that are oppositional in a lot of cases, in some cases. So I just said it, and that was it. I let everyone know. I reminded them. The whole class, didn't point anyone out. Okay. I see it again. I see the kid again. So I did my plan again. I decided, yes, I do need to talk to this kid. I'm going to find a good time to talk to this kid. It might be when my class is working on a word problem. It might be when my class is reading a passage for 5 minutes, but I'm going to try my very best to go up to that kid individually. Don't call them out in front of their peers. And I'm going to say exactly this. It makes me feel. You've heard of I statements, you've heard of effective statements and stuff like that. This is how to use it in action with a real kid. I walk up to a kid and I'll say, you know, it makes me feel disappointed that I had told everyone to put their cell phones away, and I see that your cell phone is still out. It makes me feel frustrated when I had reminded everyone to stop talking while I was talking, and I see you continue to do so. I put an emotion into it because they realize that you're a human. You're not saying, you did not listen to the expectation. I can't believe you didn't listen to me. You just say this as a matter of fact. It made me feel this way. It is like a Jedi mind trick. It is not oppositional because you just said an emotion. You're going to reduce the kids to say, but Susie's doing it too, but Johnny's doing it too. Why are you picking on me? No, it made me feel sad. It made me feel disappointed. It kind of hurt my feelings a little bit when I saw this. Then I say to them, can you tell me what's going on? I ask an open-ended question. It's just that simple. Can you tell me what's going on? You might find out in that moment that the kid has her cell phone because their mom is in the hospital and they are anxious about their mom and waiting for their mom to contact them about a status update. It might be that my brother is about to get beat up after school. It could be anything. It doesn't excuse the cell phone, but it's going to give you a better understanding of what to do next with that kid. And you also gave them a voice. If you just go to kids and say, get off that cell phone now, and never ask them a question, they're going to get oppositional with you real quick. You know they will. You have those kids in your building. You know they will. This is completely putting them at ease. It's just a conversation. And this takes just a matter of seconds. It makes me feel sad when I asked everyone to put away their computers and you didn't. Can you tell me what's happening? 9 times out of 10, they have no solid, good explanation, and they just put it away and say, I'm sorry. And that's the end of it. That's it. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be the end of it. But you're going to have a much better, it's going to be easy to move forward. So after you did say that, tell me what's going on. If they told me something that wasn't like my mom is in the hospital or my brother's going to get beat up after school, if they just had it out, have it out, and they shouldn't have, I'm going to say this next. This is the warning. If I see you on your cell phone again, if I see you talking to Susie again, if I see you out of your seat again, then I'm going to tell them what's going to happen next. If I know what's going to happen next, I'm going to say, if I see you talking to Susie again, then I'm going to have to move you seats for the rest of this class period. I'm going to tell them exactly what I'm going to do. Because we're being restorative and logical, we have to be more creative with our consequences. So you might not know what you're going to do next. And instead of saying something that you're not actually going to do, like I'm going to call your mom, like that's the bad one. Because like, where do you go from there, right? I call their mom and they don't listen. And nothing changes. Where do I go from there? Start small. I'm going to move your seat for the rest of this period. I'm going to ask you to put your cell phone on my desk for the rest of this period. Whatever it's going to do. If you cannot think of what you're going to do next because you're in the middle of a lesson or because you actually don't know, it's perfectly fine to say, hey, if I see you with your cell phone again, we're going to have a conversation about what happens next. This is not a threat. This is literally telling them predictability. Like, I'm going to do something. You know I'm going to do it. It's not a threat. I'm telling what's going to happen. It's predictability. If you do not stop talking to Susie, I'm going to have to ask you to cease for the rest of the period. Okay? It's really that simple. So the whole interaction so far is I did my plan. I decided to engage. I gave everyone a preview. Hey, remember everyone, the expectation is that we're to engage in productive work. At this time, that means your computer's away and our eyes are facing forward. The kids didn't put their computer away. I find a time that it's convenient to walk up to that kid, not in front of their peers. Hey, it makes me feel sad when I asked everyone to put their computers away and you didn't. Can you tell me more about that? They explain. Thank you for explaining that to me. But if I see your computer out again, then I'm going to have it on my desk for the rest of this period. That's where we're at so far in class, right? Like that's where we're at right now. In most cases, most of your kids at this point will be okay. Like they'll stop at that moment, right? In most cases. I'm gonna talk about what happens if it doesn't stop though, right? So in this case, you might have a go-to warning, like, if this continues, we'll have to talk after class. If this continues, we'll have to move seats or whatever. I'm gonna show you an example in about 20 slides or so of a chart that shows you an increase in amplification of logical consequences that you might want to develop with your team and your teachers, because the teachers will say, well, what if a kid talks 5 times when I ask him not to? What if the kid does this? Like the teachers are going to want that, right? Like, what is my next step if I already think of that first 2 steps and the first 2 steps don't work? Okay. So the kid tells me, like I tell him, hey, if you do not close that computer, I'm gonna have it on my desk for the rest of this period. You always give them an affirmation afterwards. You never leave at an awkward state. You say, but I know you got this. I know you can do it. I believe in you. I appreciate you, or something like that. So I don't just leave at an awkward, hey, if you do this, I'm gonna do this, but I know you can do it. That kind of thing, like give them some sort of affirmation that you believe in them, that I know you can do it. And then you walk away. You don't hover over their desk. You don't stare at them. You don't use proximity. You don't give them the teacher eye. You simply walk away. Because if you say, put that computer away right now, that kid will immediately be put into fight, flight, or freeze mode. They're going to say, Susie's doing it. I'm not doing that. They're going to be put into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. Like, we're going to put them into that state. Right now, we've done everything possible to keep them regulated in this interaction. Okay, so then they don't do it. They don't listen to the warning. Their computer is still out. Their phone is still out. They haven't stopped talking to their neighbor. Now let's talk about the consequences. What do we actually do if we've given them a preview, we've given them a warning, and now we have to actually do something? So in this case, if I had a kid that was talking to their neighbor and I told them, if this happens again, we're gonna have to talk after class, we're gonna have to have a discussion. The first thing I might say to that kid is, hey, I previewed the expectation. I did give you a warning of what would happen next. You were talking to Susie again. What do you think we can do? Like, what do you think you can do? How can we fix this? How can you make sure this doesn't happen again? I could do that. Or I could actually just give them the consequence at that time. So if I said I was going to move them seats, I have to move them seats if they did it again. If you don't move them seats when you say you're going to move them seats, you are going to look foolish. You don't say what you mean, you don't mean what you said. And teachers get hung up on, well, I want to have relationships with kids, so I'm not going to do that. The reality is that you need boundaries. You need to be firm but fair, and you need to give them love, but sometimes tough love. Like, you are not their friends. You're not. You are the person that is responsible for keeping them accountable. Okay? We have to follow through at this point. But if we're gonna follow through, we have to start small. So if you said you're gonna call their mom or their dad or their uncle, you better do it. But I'm gonna warn you, you should not say you're gonna call their mom if that's a very, very, very minor behavior, because you're gonna look foolish if the first time you interact with a kid, you call their mom. Where do you go from there? Like, what would be the next step after calling their mom, right? Like, you started too high. You like, and I don't know if you all seen The Weatherman. Wow, that escalated quickly. Like, you've gone up here for a behavior down here. It doesn't make sense. So that's why I start with moving their seat 1 day, moving their seat 2 days, permanently moving their seat, then having a phone call with the parents, coming up with a plan of action for what we can do moving forward, giving them a stress ball and helping them build strategies so that they don't talk out of turn. Like, there's a whole lot of stages you have in there before you have to call home that you can do on your own. So when we think about this and all these strategies with consequences, we're going to talk about good ideas for logical consequences, like, you know, what do I do with a kid who does this kind of thing specifically and all that kind of stuff. But in your school, with your kids and in your classrooms, if every teacher did this consistently, you would have a whole lot less kids coming to your office, and you'd have a whole lot of kids less confused about what's expected. Again, in your class, let's say in Penny's class, she doesn't do a preview or a warning. She just does a consequence. She sees kids on the computer, she takes it. In Kelly's class, she does the preview and then the consequence, but she forgot the warning. Okay. In Aaron's class, he does the preview, the warning, and then when it comes to the consequence, he gives them 5 warnings. I told you I would call your parents. I mean it this time. I'm really going to call your parents. Okay, last chance. If I see it again, then I'm going to call your parents. So Aaron gives them like 5 warnings and never follows through. But Alicia does it correctly. Previews, warns, gives out a consequence. So you all have the gist of it, but in every classroom, it's still inconsistent at this point, right? If everyone in your building does it in these steps, you're going to have a whole lot more consistency and a whole lot less behavior problems in your school. And it's all logical, it's all restorative, and it all establishes firm boundaries that kids need. So when you're thinking about that, and you're thinking about all the things that we're talking about, you may be wondering, well, what consequences should I give? And where should we go? And what does it look like, right? Because a consequence could be a detention, a suspension, a referral, and all of that other stuff, right? But I'm telling you, those are not good consequences. So it's not just having a consequence that you do consistently, it's having a consequence that is natural, logical, and or restorative built in here. So when I do that consequence, it has to teach kids things, not punish kids. So I'm gonna tell you a little story of a natural consequence that I have experienced, and a natural consequence of a school that I visited 3 weeks ago in Chicago. So a natural consequence is something that happens without you having to do anything yourself. Like it's a matter of nature. It's an act of God or whatever you want to call it, right? Like it's natural. So when you look at the natural consequence that I talked to a school about, this one girl in class told a boy in that class that she would never date someone like him. The kid was Muslim and looked a certain way, right? And this was a Caucasian girl. I would never date someone like you, okay? So pretty racist. And the other kids in the class heard it. And instead of like saying and agreeing with her, they started calling her out for being racist. And even though she apologized to the kid in a restorative conversation later, the kid was going and telling all of his friends what she said in that school. And all of a sudden, it was a school-wide thing of people talking about this girl being racist. She said something that she shouldn't have. And that's, but the thing is, me or the admin then suspending her or expelling her, does that teach her more? Or is the fact that she now has to deal with the social conflict that she's created in that school, right? And the admin team can't just let this go on, because it's not good to spread rumors and talk about people in the school. So there had to be a stop to it, right? But she experienced a natural consequence right there of, wow, I'm never gonna say something like that again. So what we had to do in that school in particular is we had to have a classroom circle with the kids that were in that class that had heard it. The people all got to go around, and I had the mother's permission to do this, because you never want to be accused of embarrassing somebody's child in this matter. I talked to the parents and let them know that, hey, we can't really control every conversation in that school, but if we want to be proactive, she's going to have to face what she did and take ownership of it. And if she does that, the chances of her, being able to restore her relationships in that school are going to be much higher. So I talked to the parents through it and what it would look like and got their permission. So they actually did a reactive circle. All the kids in that class circled up, and they all got to go around, and they could either pass or they could say something about how that statement affected them, how that statement made them feel. And the girl heard that. She heard the hurt that she had caused, and she apologized to everyone profusely and learned her lesson. And after that, a week or two had passed, and it wasn't really a topic of conversation anymore at that school. But did I need to add insult to injury by also suspending the girl for saying something like that? Would that have caused any change? Or was what I did of her taking ownership and having to apologize to the class way more effective in a life lesson right there? So that would be an example of a natural consequence, but also a restorative consequence, because she had to redeem herself in that moment. Another example of a natural consequence that I experienced, those microphones that people wear on their head as a headset? Like instead of a handheld, they're actually wearing, like Britney Spears does when she dances and stuff like that. So I was presenting at the ASCD conference in Salt Lake City. I was presenting, it was one of my first big gigs. 350 or 400 people were in that room. It was a ballroom. It was beautiful. So I thought I was doing a pretty good job presenting in front of all these people. I'm there with my co-author, Nathan Maynard. So I am done with my part, and now it's Nathan's part. So I decide to go to the bathroom while Nathan was talking. Nathan was talking about trauma at that time as well. So keep that in mind, he was talking about trauma. So I leave, I go to the bathroom, I come back. The entire room is staring at me. Why would 400 people be turned around in their chairs looking at me instead of Nathan, who was at the front of the room? I looked down at my mic. The green light was on. the green light was on in my mic. So everyone in that room heard everything that happened in the bathroom. And I walked in, and it was obviously pretty darn mortifying, right? I mean, there's scenes in movies about this. It doesn't really happen in real life, but it did. Luckily, it was a quick trip to the bathroom, not a long trip to the bathroom. And they did hear everything and the toilet flush and all that kind of stuff. Luckily, I didn't stop on the way and have conversations with people about how much better I was than Nathan. You know what I mean? I'm just kidding. But, luckily I didn't say anything to anybody. But what in that moment, I have never made that mistake again. And if Nathan would have said, you know what, Brad, I'm not going to present with you for like 5 months until you learn your lesson. Or you know what, Brad, we're going to pay you less the next time we go out because you made this mistake. That would have taught me nothing. I learned my lesson, and I have never used a headset again. I always make sure that I have a handheld microphone from now on. So that was a natural consequence in the real world that I experienced. So if you all ever present, stay away from the headset if you want to avoid that situation again. Logical consequences are just simply paired to exactly what the kid did. So if a kid made a mess in the cafeteria, the logical consequence would be to clean up that mess they made in the cafeteria. Amping that up might be you're not only cleaning your table, but now you're cleaning this half of the tables and so forth and so on. That would be logical. A kid messes up your classroom, throws trash all over the floor, it would be cleaning up the floor. That would be the logical consequence, and so forth and so on, right? And we'll get more into that. Restorative consequence would be making amends. If you left your trash on the table and you cleaned it the first time, but then you did it again, you might now not only have to clean several tables, but you might now have to talk to the custodian, and the custodian will get to tell you how it made their day worse because they had to spend an extra half hour cleaning your mess, and you're going to have to own your behavior with that custodian. So a restorative consequence in the situation I talked to you about before was the girl had to listen to how her actions impacted her classmates, and then she had to apologize to her classmates. So a restorative consequence is in fact taking ownership, apologizing, writing a letter, making amends in some way, shape, or form. These are all consequences, and these do not let kids off the hook, right? Like, kids are not getting off the hook in this case. They are actually having to take ownership directly for their actions. And these are what causes intrinsic change and behaviors to alter with our kids. When we come back, we're going to get more into this and these conversations and what they look like, and go deeper with this. But we are going to have our lunch break. I will see you back at 12:30. So in 1 hour, we're going to come back and dig a little bit deeper with this, but please step away from your computer, take care of whatever you need to take care of. I will see you back in 1 hour at 30 after. All right, have a good break. And we are going to continue with where we were. Our goal today, we're going until around 2:30 your time, but we might get done a little bit early. I'm sure you all won't complain if we get done a few minutes early. And we're going to continue on with our restorative practices and the things that we were learning about before lunch. So again, welcome back. I'm going to share my screen once again. All right. So just as a little bit of a recap, we had talked a little bit about, the reactive side of restorative practices, and we had talked a little bit about the pre-engagement and things like that. So where we were was we were at the point where we were doing the plan method, pause, listen, act, and next. And we had decided that we were going to make sure that we were seeing what we thought we were saying, listening to our body, doing a regulation strategy ourselves. Then we saw kids in class or in the hallways. We did our preview, let everyone know the broad expectations. We did a, hey, it makes me feel sad when I see you not engaging in productive work. Tell me what's going on. If I see that again, then we're gonna have to do this. And then we got to the consequences, where at that point, we were gonna have to figure out if we were going to engage and the student didn't do what we needed them to do the first couple of times, Then we're in that consequence phase. We talked about the natural consequences being something that, you know, happens as a result of natural causes, like you run in the hallway, you trip and you fall. That's natural. We talked about logical, something that pairs directly with the consequence at hand. So again, you tease a kid for, you know, you tease a kid, so you're gonna have to apologize to that kid. You make a mess on the floor, you're gonna have to clean the floor, and so forth and so on. And then we talked about restorative consequences where we make amends, where we have to apologize, where we write a letter of apology, a verbal apology. We have to hear how our actions impact others and all of those kinds of things. So I want us to digest all that stuff that I just talked about so that we are sure that we have that down, because the next stage will be a little bit more intense when we're dealing with something that's a little bit more intensive of a behavior in our classes. So what I'm gonna do with you all is I'm going to talk about a few things, and I want us to reflect with our groups and in our breakout rooms in just a minute. What natural, logical, or restorative consequences do you currently use at your school, if any? Or is that something in your school that you're trying to work on, and how might you work on that kind of thing with your teachers and your staff? That's what I want you to think about and talk about. Are your consequences in fact natural, logical, or restorative? If they're not, talk about how you might move towards that model, what you might do, what steps you might need to take in order to accomplish that. And if you have these consequences in place, please share that with the other groups and how you came to get those consequences and how you implemented that at your school. So again, I am going to have you all talk about your current consequences that you have in your handbook, that you have in your school. And, you know, is there any cases that you know of where you in fact did do things that were restorative or logical in nature? So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms again. Please go ahead and accept that invitation. And we're going to just digest what we've talked about so far with that. I'm going to place this prompt into the chat in just a second. All right, so again, please go ahead and accept your invitation. I'm going to put the prompt into the breakout room, but essentially, what do consequences look like at your school? All right, I see some of you are unassigned, so I'm going to assign you because I think you might have logged out accidentally or logged out intentionally. All right, so if I'm assigning you into rooms now, if you weren't previously assigned. All right, so everyone should be assigned a room this time. So please do accept that invitation if you haven't accepted it already. Before we move forward, was anyone doing something that you were like, wow, that's pretty cool that you'd like to share? Did you have any commonalities with the other schools that you'd like to share? Like, what was the gist of your conversation? And you can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat, either way.
I'd like to share something that Carol shared from her group or from her school, one of her schools. Rather than, well, it was an option, I think. Instead of students going to after-school detention, they have a girls group. I think the name was Pure, and they gave them the option to attend that group in lieu of after-school detention. And I thought that was a great idea.
That is awesome. So when they attend this group, what is the group like? Like, what do they do?
So it's ran by one of our school board members, and they talk about like things related on being a young lady and a leader and things like that. So I will say, does it necessarily probably address what the problem maybe of what sent them there? That probably conversation's not happening. However, this was a huge step for us, and not put that kid in detention to suspend. I was very thankful and grateful that the principal was like, hey, let's try this, because he's a new principal. Well, he's not new principal, but came back to our district. And that just, I was telling them, the teachers, not, all so happy, but like I said, that's the only way we're going to change the behavior. Give her a way to be a part of something. And so that's how that came about. But I mean, I think with Anna and I think Lacey, like they have some great things too in Warren County, as like the Boys to Men that actually we're going to be meeting with Warren County about to try and get started at E-Town also. And then that their Pearls, their Pearl group. I mean, I think they should talk about it, because that's amazing stuff right there, of what they're doing and leading ladies. I love it because I stole the name.
Yes, we talked about, we have the Boys to Men group, and then so a couple of our schools, I coach 5 different schools along with Anna and Penny, have started a leading ladies group. And it's sort of the same concept: leadership, self-esteem, just for girls that meet. So just real excited that we're able to start these groups back up, because we missed that last year.
So question for you is Boys to Men still upset that NSYNC and Backstreet Boys kind of overshoot? They stole their vibe, right? Like they did this.
Right, exactly.
Boys to Men was on top of the world. Then all the bands, 98 Degrees, NSYNC, all of them copied their vibe. Are they still mad about that, or are they pretty good now?
I think they might be okay.
Might be okay. I actually watched a documentary on them. Netflix has like how movies were, how your favorite movies were made, or your favorite bands or stuff like that. There's actually one on Boys to Men.
Right.
So yeah. So it's not boys like 2 Men like the band. It's like a group at your school.
Mentoring group. Yes, they
Mentoring,
meet
okay.
and they develop different leadership skills, have different mentors. They even have a big conference once a year where different men in the community come, and it's gotten bigger and bigger, and they have speakers. It's just really cool.
They also have a creed that they have to learn. And then as they gain certain skills, they have different ties that they earn. And like one day a week, they wear khaki pants, a white shirt, and a tie, so that people know that they're a part of Boys to Men. And we were talking about how the first time that we had Boys to Men at the school that I was at 2 years ago, I literally got teary the first day that they walked down the hallway, because they walked differently. They just walked differently when they had the white shirt and their tie on. And it was really neat to see that. They were so proud of themselves, and I was so proud, moved to tears.
Wow, that's amazing. Is that a specific organization, or is that something your school district developed?
Oh, go ahead, Anna.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
No, I was just going to say we have a gentleman. He was with the Bowling Green, I believe, right, Anna? That's had started in Bowling Green City Schools, and then I know some of our family resource coordinators and the principals reached out, And then it kind of, we just adapted it as well. So he's helping, Mr. Clark is his name. He is helping both Warren County and Bowling Green Independent, and it's kind of merged into one. They do, several events together as just general boys to men. And so it's a great initiative that both school districts have adopted.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, any information you have, I would love to have, Kelly love to have, because that's something
Okay.
we're sharing. That's something we're sharing. You know what I mean? Like, that's something that hopefully we can spread and make even bigger, because if it's having that impact on your school, I imagine your corporation, it can have an impact on others.
Yeah, and even it's Mr. Clark now is part of the Jonesville Academy, and on Saturdays now they have school, and it's math focused and science focused, and I believe that is for Bowling Green and anyone in the county, boys. And I believe it starts at third grade through sixth grade, or fourth grade through sixth grade, and it really has made an impact on some of these boys.
That's fantastic. And people don't realize it, we lose them, we start losing them then, right? Like, it's not high school when we first start to lose kids, and kids start getting into lost in the cracks and stuff like that. It starts in the elementary school. It typically starts in the late elementary school. Third grade and up is when we start to see some of those things happening. So
Yeah.
that's fantastic that it starts then instead of waiting until high school.
Yeah, and they've had lots of partnerships because with Western, because it happens on Western's campus. So the whole community has just really embraced the whole Boys to Men Jonesville Academy. For high school, they have they graduate onto another program that meets at Western. So it's just the mentoring program starting early.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, cool. Anything you can send us, let us know. We would
Okay,
appreciate
sure.
it.
We'll get some stuff together.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much. Does anyone want to add to what they had said, or have something else that they heard? Because that's awesome. I love it. Anything else interesting come out of your conversation, like commonalities or things that you're already doing that are pretty restorative?
My name's Christy Dalton, and I'm in Davis County. And I talked about one practice at some of my schools where they have a mindful room located in the school. And when there's a problem with a student, it will be like a admin person will come to that classroom, but they allow that teacher and the student having the problems to go to the mindful room together. And so it, keeps that relationship intact, and it allows both of them, to use self-regulation and calm down strategies, and I feel like it gives that student the sense that I'm not leaving you, or I'm not passing you off to someone else, like you're not, you don't have so many problems that I can't handle it. So we've seen a lot of success using that technique.
So it's an actual location in the school outside of the classrooms that you go to if you are like in dysregulation, or how do you go there?
There's all kinds of stuff in there. There's like these sequence boards that we built. There's like you can do the breathing techniques, and the room is, it's set up because I've always been taught if you could change 3 of the 5 senses when someone is dysregulated, that it gets them back quicker to a regulated state. So, there could be scents in there. There's things that are tactile. You could get like a little cup of water. So you're trying to change all of those senses if you can while you're in that room too.
Wow, that's really cool. We'd love to see a picture of it if you got one, or if you could take one.
I will. I have some videos. I have some stuff that I could send you on what it looks like. We've been able to do that because we applied for a grant through our local hospital, and they've been really supportive in giving us grant funds to try to do some of that kind of stuff.
Oh, that is amazing. Yeah, I'd love to see it. Kelly, I'm sure would love to receive those videos and the Boys and Men contacts and that kind of stuff. Kelly, could you, if you're able to hear me, could you tell them about the calming corner things that are going on, or talk a little bit about that?
Oh, I definitely can. And so any of the Project Prevent districts that are on here are already aware of those, but we've been able to, that's a part of our grant, is to, as a tier 1 support, start talking more about how can we have safe spaces or calming corners in our classrooms and in our schools. And so we've been able to purchase supplies to build some of those spaces within schools, and the use of break cards. And so all of our districts are in different places with that, but so like Christy was talking about what they're doing in Davis County. So they were already ahead of that game as far as having some of these safe spaces. And so some of our other districts are just now rolling that out to where they're doing calming corners in all of their classrooms, and just, you know, really equipping teachers with the understanding of how these spaces can work and how that can help students be able to self-regulate and be able to, you know, control some of their own behavior before it gets out of hand. So, yeah. And so anything that you're talking about, I'll drop my email there in the chat. If you have things that you want to share, I will make sure to share them out with the group and with Brad as well. So I appreciate all your sharing. So enjoying.
Like to, so we don't have a calming, but Miranda, our district therapist, she created a website. And so we have shared that with some of our people and everything, and trying to branch that out more, because we don't have a, you know, in there, but we have she's created an amazing website. And Miranda, if you want to talk more about that, of how, you know, for people to be able to use that, since we're in this virtual world and maybe they can't go to a corner or anything like that, we do need to develop those things, but this is at least a way for them to have access to it, even at home. That's what's amazing with the website. So we've even shared it out on Facebook and things like that, that even parents, and it gives resources. But Miranda, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I can. So I have the website where it has links to different breathing techniques, grounding techniques, which, you know, it's basically links to YouTube or different other resources you can find, but it's all in one place. But I also created a staff section that discuss ACEs and trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practices. That way it's just a one link that you can find all this abundance of information. And I've also encouraged teachers and staff that if they use something that's not on there, to email me and I will add it on there as well. And I'm hoping in the future to add community resources like pediatricians, doctor's office, mental health facilities. That way, all the resources are in one place for anybody new or existing in the district.
That's amazing. And we would love to see that. If you would email that to Kelly and me, or just Kelly should get it to me, or whatever. But you know, there's so many great things happening, and that's why I like doing this. I get to hear what a lot of people are doing in their districts, and it's so great that we're getting together and talking and sharing this kind of information. Did you have something to say, Kelly?
No, well, I was just going to say that Miranda's site is amazing. She's done a great job with that virtual calming corner. So kudos to her. Yes.
So virtual calming corner, as in like they actually are in a calming corner online. Is that what we're saying, or is the resources part? I was kind of confused as to that.
So it's a website that has different video links on breathing techniques, grounding.
Okay.
I mean, there's visual, there's petting, like virtual petting zoos where you can watch cameras of different animals and brain
Oh, that's
games.
cool.
So it's all online, and it's at the teachers, staff, parents, anybody can have access to that on the district website.
That is amazing. I have a friend who does a lot of augmented reality stuff. It's kind of like virtual reality, but more. And I just had the idea, like, would it be cool if we had an augmented reality calming room where you actually could put on a VR headset and walk around the room and touch stuff and mess with stuff. That would be pretty awesome. And you wouldn't need a space in your building. It'd be more of like a headset kind of idea. So if any of you ever know anything about that, that's cool. But I think that'd be pretty awesome. All right. Thank you all so much for sharing that great stuff that you're already doing. Like I said, that's awesome. You might learn as much from each other as you do from me today, and I hope that's the case. That's why we like to do these breakout rooms and have these conversations, because there's already great things happening everywhere. All right, cool. So we're going to continue on, like I said, with the goal of finishing up a little bit early today, because I know you all have all kinds of great things that you're working on today, and all kinds of things that are not so great, but you have to do them anyway, because it's just part of what we're doing. So I'm going to share my screen again, just so we can continue on. And again, thank you so much for sharing today. That is amazing stuff. So we were talking about consequences, and we were talking about restorative, logical, and natural consequences. As you know, there's a lot of institutional knowledge inside this room right now. We really want to emphasize to our teachers, our support staff, our administrators. We talked about the consequence where we told them we would have to move them seats. We talked about the consequence where we'd have to remove their cell phone. We talked about the consequence where we'd have to do this or that. Whenever humanly possible, have this discussion away from their peers. I know that might sound like common sense, but it's not. I've seen it way more often than I should. It is not everyone's business that the kid is having to move their seat. It is not everyone's business that we're trying to remove their phone or to ask them to give our computer to a desk. These discussions, whenever possible, should be private. I know that's common sense to you, but it's not common sense to everyone. Because the kid is going to have an audience, and the kid's going to try to show you up in front of their peers. And then all of a sudden it's a power struggle when it could have been something very small and minor. So we need to keep small things small, in other words. And one of the ways to do that is to have this discussion away from their peers. When to give that consequence that we talked about? Always after a warning. Always. So if I, in fact, said that I'm going to do this, I have to do it. That is where most teachers fall through on this plan, is they don't actually move them seats. They don't actually have them bring their phone up to their desk. They don't actually call their mom. They just say that they're going to, and then they warn them and warn them and warn them. It has to happen consistently, and it has to be logical. It has to be restorative and all that stuff, but we have to give out consequences to the kids, or it's just not going to go well. And you're all thinking, okay, so what if, and this is like my co-author, Nathan Maynard, he worked in the juvenile justice system. He worked on the violent offender unit. So he's worked with students that have committed violence against others or sexual assault against others. Like that is a lot of his background when it comes to behaviors. So he is really knowledgeable about kids that have ODD, kids that might not trust the adults. He's had all kinds of things like that happen in his career. So he was a very big factor in our book with like, what do we do when kids refuse after that last time? At this point, we tend to get really, really, really agitated. We tend to lose our cool as the educator. And this is the point where kids start throwing desk, and kids start cussing you out, and kids start flipping you off, and it becomes a spectacle, right? This is that point. There is one small trick that is like a Jedi mind trick. It's brilliant. I didn't come up with it, Nathan did. When this happens, you ask the kid you go up to the kid, you say, please put your cell phone on my desk. I've asked you and I gave you a warning. So what I need you to do right now is put it on the desk for me, please. You walk away. They don't do it. You ask them to move seats after you followed all those other steps. If you followed all those other steps, they know what's coming next, right? That predictability exists. That's why that predictability needs to be in place. But even though they knew that you were going to ask them to move their phone or to bring their phone or to close your computer, some kids, very small percentage at this point, are not going to do what you need to do. It's about power at that point. It is a power struggle at that point, right? That is the power. They want to keep their power. You want to keep your power because you are the adult. You need to think about it that way, as they're trying not to give up their power. They are literally in fight, flight, or freeze mode right now. They're gonna fight you. That's what they're doing. They're fighting you. So what you need to do at this point, if they say no, or they don't get up, or they don't bring their phone, I just say matter of fact, and I'm doing this in private, hey, you can come out with me in the hallway right now, or hey, you can bring your phone to my desk right now, or hey, you can, close your computer right now, or I'm gonna have to figure out what to do without you. That last part of that sentence is literally a Jedi mind trick, because they realize that they have lost all of their control in that situation. They have it. I'm trying to let you have some of your control, but if you don't come with me, if you don't do this, I'm gonna have to figure out what to do without you. Like, basically, I'm gonna let them know that it's not gonna be, they're not gonna be part of the conversation anymore at that point, right? At that point, they're not going to immediately give you their computer. At that point, they're not going to immediately move seats. At that point, they're not going to immediately do whatever. Here's what you need to do. You need to say, I'm going to give you 1 minute, or I'm going to give you 2 minutes to make the right decision. And if you make the right decision, it's going to be over. We're going to figure it out, and it's not going to go any farther. And then you walk away. The mistake we make is at this point, we demand they do it right then and there, and the whole class is listening at this point. We give them a minute or two to process and digest and synthesize and to think about what is correct. Almost every time, if you don't give them that time to think, they're going to explode. They're going to say no. They're going to show you up. If you give them that processing time right then and there, you don't sit there and stare at them for 2 minutes. You don't make eye contact, touch your watch. You don't give them the teacher eye for 2 minutes. You don't stand by them for 2 minutes. You walk away. No one even in the class is even really aware of what's going on right then and there. They are going to be aware if you make it obvious that I'm sitting there watching that kid for 2 minutes, or this is going to happen, okay? So you walk away. Most kids, I would say 99% of the kids by now have did what you want them to do. This is that 1% of the time at this point. Almost every time at this point, when they have 2 minutes to think about it, they're going to do what they need to do at that point, because they have had time to think about it. If they don't still, which is extremely rare, if they followed preview, warn, consequence, this, time to think. If the kid is flat out not going crazy and not flipping desks or not yelling at you, I'm not going to call the office at this point, but I am going to let the office know that this is something that happened in class, and this is something that they're going to have to talk to the kid about. This is the point in which I let the office know. This is the point upon which I might need support or ask for help as the teacher. If the kid's throwing desks or flipping chairs, I call the office right then, right? Because that's a dangerous situation. But if the kid is not being dangerous or not being outwardly aggressive with you, I tell them, now what we're gonna have to deal with is the fact that the kid did not listen to you, and the fact that they wouldn't have their computer closed. So now there's two things we're addressing when we have that restorative conversation with the administrator, right? It's not just that you wouldn't put your computer away. Now it's that you completely refuse to listen to your teacher. So now you have two things to restore. Now you have potentially two consequences and two things to fix. But this conversation that goes that deep is probably best held with an administrator and potentially bringing the teacher in at another time. But if you're an admin in this room or somebody that works with admin, would you be pretty okay if your teacher had followed all those steps I talked about first and then called you down? Would that be a little bit more understandable than if they called you down immediately when a kid would get out of their seat and then immediately called you down and asked for help and made a big spectacle of everything, right? So there will be a point upon which those teachers does need support, but it's not until the last straw. In other words, we call admin down way too quickly, just to be honest with you, don't we? And who do we call the admin on more often than not? Who gets a little bit more agitated when the teacher comes at them like that sometimes? Will be our students of color, right? Because we're already disconnected. It's already a person of the opposite race. It's already somebody who I feel like they pinpointed me out when my friends were doing it too. So now we're getting at the point where we're getting into that mode. So this is something that's not just this, it's also about equitable, it's also about predictability, and it's also about doing the right thing. So anyone have any questions about this? I know that we've talked a lot in a row about this thing. Does it generally make sense? All the stages this should happen before you're called? Obviously, like I said, if it's an on-site situation, like they're throwing chairs, then the admin should be called immediately. But anything other than that can wait, right? So everyone always asks Nathan and I, well, what is an example of a logical tiered consequences for when students keep talking in class? What if they the next day return and they keep talking in class? What if they do it 9 times in a row and they keep talking in class? Your teachers are going to want to know, well, what does it look like to be logical and to be restorative going forward continuously? Because you can't just every single time have the kid apologize, right? You do something, you say you're sorry. You do something again the next day, you say you're sorry. You do something again the next day, you say you're sorry, and it's not working, right? So what your school might think about developing is some sort of guide for teachers. And I would even have common behaviors on the left. And you might have what you might try the first time related to this behavior, what you might try the first couple of times, what you might try a little bit further down the line, and so forth and so on, so that the teachers don't jump to phone call home as their immediate solution to kids talking in class and so forth and so on. The reason why I'm hesitant to just make one and give it to people is because people use this as the gospel, and instead of the restorative conversations, instead of the preview warning consequence, instead of building a relationship with a kid, if a kid talks 3 times, they give them this logical consequence with none of the other steps involved. Does that make sense? Like, this is not like in place of relationships. It's not in place of conversations. It's just a guide for when you get to the point where you need a consequence that you might refer to. It can be misused because people think that now they don't have to talk to kids. They can just give them consequences that are better versus relationships that are better. Does that kind of make sense? It's not, it becomes a crutch, in other words. But if you don't have something like this, in addition to those other skills, some of your teachers might feel stuck and they might feel a little bit lost as to what could they do if a kid keeps on doing a certain specific behavior that continues to be logical and restorative. And feel free to take a screenshot of this, take a picture with your phone or whatever. This is just a starting point for you. It's just a very small example of what you might think about developing with your class. You see right there, POA. POA, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, means plan of action. Restorative practices doesn't always focus on future facing. It doesn't always focus on past. Restorative practices sometimes focuses on just the event that happened, but not the underlying issues sometimes, and sometimes not what will you do the next time a kid makes you mad stuff. Plan of action, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, is the end of the restorative conversation. You never leave a restorative conversation without the kid having a game plan. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But feel free to take a screenshot of this as just a starting point, just to get an idea, because your teachers might be asking for something like this. So overall, when we think about behavior, it's not about winning. It's not. You might think that you have to show your kids up. If they're talking back to you, you might think that you have to win the argument or whatever. It's not about that. It's about the long game. It's about how do I get it to where that kid's not flipping chairs 3 weeks from now versus how do I win this one argument I'm having with this kid right now? It's the long game. Don't take it personally. Most kids are acting out. It has very little to do with you in most cases. It has to do with their trauma. It has to do with their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their parents, their lack of parents, not getting fed. There's a lot of underlying issues when it comes to behavior, and we take it so personally when a kid says something to us, when it's just a manifestation of something bigger. Don't preach your views. Don't say, when I was a kid, I would get my wrist slapped by a nun if I taught that to my teacher. Don't say, in my days, we tucked in our pants. In my day, we did that and we did this. Kids don't care about those kinds of things. If they ask you, that's cool, but they don't care what life was like 20, 30 years ago back in the day when you were in school. And you could be 25 and they think it's 23 years ago, right? They think that you're old and they think that you don't know what kids go through anymore. They don't. The other thing is give students a voice and choice. So that would be, hey, can you tell me what's going on? Hey, how do you think you can fix this? Involving them in the discipline process, kind of thing like that. And we're going to talk more about what that looks like specifically coming up. All right, it's 2:23. All right, it is 1:23. We're going to take one more break, and then we're going to finish the day strong. And we just have a few more things to cover. That was a very quick 53 minutes. Holy cow, that went by quickly. All right, we're going to come back at 34 after. So in 10 minutes at 34 after, we're going to come back, and then we're going to finish the day strong with just a few more things going forward. Will be shared out. All right, so we're gonna continue on. Like I said, with that last little bit of information, I'm gonna share my screen once again. All right. So we talked a lot about in the classroom, like what the teacher should do or what a staff member should do with kids so that they're not sent out to the office. We talked about, if they do in fact get sent to the office, it's only after those steps that I mentioned have been followed, which is, again, going to lead to a whole lot less kids getting to the point where they need to get sent down to the office. Kelly had mentioned calming corners. Those are a great idea and a great use for when kids are feeling a little bit dysregulated. We teach them how to use the calming corner. We have procedures in place for that to happen so that, again, sometimes you're not disciplining the kid. Sometimes you are taking a moment to let the kid cool down because they are dysregulated because of external factors, of trauma, or they might be really upset about their girlfriend. Whatever the case might be, the calming corners are also a great idea, in addition to the sensory room that I heard about as well. All right, so the next thing I want to talk to you about is a critical component of the restorative cycle that tends to not happen very well in schools. I'm just going to be honest with you. I work with schools everywhere, in a lot of places. I've seen a lot of schools, talked to a lot of districts. I have yet to see this process I'm about to talk to you next going well. Just being honest with you, this doesn't typically go well in schools. And if this goes well in schools, you're going to have a whole lot more buy-in from your teachers, and you're going to have a whole lot better of a situation with your students as well. We talked about all the things we should do to prevent a kid from leaving class, but what happens when that doesn't work and the kid does have to leave class, right? We have to remove them for some reason, whether it's suspension, whether it is a referral or something unsafe. But when a kid does have to get removed from class, that's not the end of it where we were. This is when the kid is removed. And again, no matter how great you are at what you do, some kids will still not get where you need them to be. They will still not be regulated. They will still flip you off. They will still throw a chair and all those kinds of things, right? They'll do it less often if we do the strategy we talked about, but this is when we get to the point where we do in fact need to consider the next steps. So we're talking about a power transfer. Here's what I'm talking about here. So think about the student, the teacher, the administrator in the school. Everyone wants power. Everyone wants to keep it. Everyone wants to hold it. Here's the thing, and the thing that I think classroom teachers don't always consider is that in the classroom, you're trying to share power with your students as much as you can. You're letting the students have voice and choice in their schoolwork. You are letting the students talk in a circle. All the stuff we talked about last week or a few weeks ago with restorative pedagogy. We're trying to share some power with our kids as much as we can in the best way possible, right? But the teacher is still the one that has to be accountable for the class. Now what we're talking about is when the teacher does call the office or an administrator does get involved, that power that the teacher had vanishes. And it doesn't vanish as in like it disappears, it transfers from them to the administrator completely. The teacher has lost all power in the situation when an administrator gets involved. And that is not a good thing, because at that point, it'd be like if you called the police. You can't tell the police once you call them and they arrive, hey, don't arrest them, or hey, don't do this. Like, it's out of your hands at that point. You know what I mean? So you've called the police, in other words, right? You've called the administrator at this point because you felt like you needed to. You need to be very, very, very sure that when you call the administrator, you really need to. You know what I mean? And you want to avoid this at all costs, if you could, because when you call the administrator in, they're going to come in and the kid's going to go with them, or the kid's going to be with them. You don't know what they're going to talk about. You know what the resolution is going to be like. You don't know if they're going to go down and get some candy and in a chocolate bar and get sent back to you and you're frustrated. You don't know what's going to happen, right? Here's the thing though. You should know what's going to happen if you're the teacher. You know why? Because we're all on the same team. We all need to know what is happening with that kid when we send them down, and we need to know the plan to bring them back. It has to be a cycle, a loop, in other words. So here's how this works. So the administrator, you need to know and have tier 1 interventions or tier 2 interventions or tier 3 interventions that are in common with your entire school. So in other words, if the kid has a behavior plan and this is how we get them to regulate, we need to follow that behavior plan in the office for how to get that kid to regulate. A lot of the time, the kid that's in your office has a behavior plan, right? Because you see a lot of the kids with trauma, a lot of the kids that have exhibited a lot of behaviors over time are the ones in your office the most. Just statistically, not always, right? There are cases where a boyfriend broke up with his girlfriend and he goes nuts or whatever. I know that. But for the most part, a lot of the kids you're talking to do have a behavior plan in place or something like that. Or the teacher in the school has a calming corner. The teacher in the school has, here are ways we de-escalate kids. Here are the steps that we take. What you don't want to have happen is an incentivization of the kid going to the office. The kid should not want to leave the classroom because they like the administrator better, because the administrator lets them have candy, because the administrator lets them have soda, whatever the case. And if you've ever been a teacher and they come back with a lollipop and a smile on their face, you're pretty darn mad about it, right? So you need to follow as an administrator the plan for whatever that kid is. And most of your kids in the building should have a simple way that we deregulate and de-escalate. Our goal is to de-escalate the kid, figure out a way to repair the harm, and help build a skill for the reason why they acted out in the first place. That should be your goal with them. It's not a break. It's not fun time. It's not time to be their friend. It is time to figure things out together with that kid. It doesn't mean you're mean to that kid. It just means you shouldn't put a cartoon on for him. You shouldn't give him candy. You shouldn't give him soda and all of that stuff, because that kid is going to want to go there next time they're struggling. And you don't want that. So what does it look like? Okay. Your goal as an administrator is to prepare the kid for reentry. You need to bring the kid back. Here's the thing. We tend to just plop the kid back in class. The kid got kicked out of class in 3rd period, and then there they are in 3rd period the next day. Teacher doesn't know what happened. No one's in the know. The kid feels like the teacher's mean. The teacher is frustrated and now might have a grudge against the kid because they can do whatever they want and just come back. The student now feels a lack of sense of belonging in that classroom. It's just not good. Like, it's just awkward, right? Have you ever gotten in a fight with your significant other or somebody or a family member, and you all just got in a fight and then nothing happened, then you saw each other the next day and it was kind of awkward? No one wants to say sorry, kind of thing. That's what that's like right there. If you're an administrator, you have to do it in this way. You prepare the kid to come back. So you have the kid, we talk through repairing the harm, we ask them the restorative questions, we let them know, hey, you threw a chair in Miss Jones's class, and how do you think Ms. Jones felt at that moment in time? So you have those restorative questions and the empathy building and stuff like that. You also prepare the kid for the conversation when they're going to come back to that class. So you say, hey, we're going to have to go and talk to Mrs. Jones. You can either call her in advance and let her know you're coming in third period, or you can set up a time, hey, Miss Jones, during your prep, I want you to come visit me for 10 minutes so we can talk to John or whatever. The teacher needs to know it's coming. Do not just bring the kid unexpected to that teacher when they're dysregulated themselves, right? They need to know the kid is returning. The educator has to be trained in that they have to take the kid back. They have to, because it will be absolutely devastating and destroy all the work that occurred if you bring that kid back to that teacher, and the teacher goes, no, they don't have any respect. I don't want him in my room. Can you imagine how disheartening that'd be to that kid who had this great talk with you and has a plan to come back, and then the teacher is the immature one? The teacher is the one holding a grudge? I've seen it happen. Have you? I've seen it happen. Or they got them back to the class and then the teacher lectured them once they got in the door, right? The teacher needs to realize that when they are asked to come back, they know that the kid's being brought back to them at this time. They have to either say, yes, Johnny, I accept your apology. And we practice the apology with the kid, like I role play it with the kid, you know what I mean? Like I'm like, hey, I'm gonna pretend to be Mrs. Jones and tell me what you have to say. Miss Jones has to either accept that apology from that kid or whatever. That kid might still have to clean the room if they caused a mess or all that stuff, right? Like they still have to have the logical consequence. But at this point, I brought back, so you either have to say, yes, I accept your apology. Thank you so much. I know that must have been tough or something like that. Or they have to have a realistic time to return back. You can say, and this gives some teachers some power too, right? You can say, hey, if you're not ready to have them back this period, you need to tell me when today I can bring them back, or when tomorrow I can bring them back. It's today or tomorrow. It's not a week from now. It's not never, right? The teacher has this power. They're like, wow, I had this power now, right? I'm transferring the power that was taken from the teacher and I'm giving it back to the teacher. The kid literally has to ask for permission to come back to that class. And that only works if the teachers are trained on what they need to say too, right? So they need to see that I need to ask that teacher for permission coming back. And when that occurs, the balance is restored in the force. I'm thinking Star Wars right now, but the balance in the force is restored right there at that point in time. When the teacher generally accepts the apology, says, hey, that must have been tough. Thank you so much for that. The teacher might have some apologizing to do too, because maybe the teacher kicked them out of class because they were in a bad mood. Or maybe the teacher was quick to react too. So the teacher will get a chance to say whatever they need to say to the kid as well. When this happens, the kid realizes that the teacher doesn't hate him. The kid realizes that it was just a tough day and a tough situation, but the kid has their whole sense of belonging restored. So in this case, the relationship between the student and the educator has to be restored. If not, you just throw them back in that room. The kid might not talk for like a week because they got in trouble in that class, but they're not talking out of fear. They're not talking because they're disengaged. They're not talking because they have given up. So you got them not talking, but you also have them now not caring about your class and thinking that you hate them. That's not success, is it? Success is the kid feels like they made a mistake, but now the mistake has been resolved. That's success. That belonging has to be reestablished in that classroom, because if the kid doesn't feel like they belong, they're not going to care and they're not going to try. And if they do care and they do try, they're going to do it despite you. You have to keep in mind as an educator that one moment can define your entire relationship. You can be done with someone. Like, think about your staff members. Like, has anyone ever talked about you behind your back that you worked with and you're like, screw that lady, screw that man, and you've avoided them the whole rest of the year and never wanted anything to do with them? Just that one interaction where they're talking about you or something like that? I have. Like, I don't know about you all. So instead of me fixing it with them or saying, hey, I hurt my feelings when I heard this, I just avoided them or talked trash about them to other staff members, right? That's not what you want with your kids. We have to reestablish that and keep in mind that you kick the kid out of class and you might not have thought about it past that, but that kid's been thinking about that for weeks. We have to think about what the kid thinks and how fragile our relationship is with them. Perception is reality. If you're an administrator in this room, have you ever heard, well, why did you get sent out of class? Miss Jones doesn't like me. Have you heard that on the receiving end? Well, Miss Jones doesn't like me, or Miss Jones doesn't like the boys, or Miss Jones doesn't like the girls, or something like that, right? They actually believe that. Perception is reality to them. And if the kid is just plopped back into that room, resentment, withdrawal, and the behaviors can get even worse because now they realize that the teacher has no power, right? But hey, if you're gonna have to call the administrator because you can't do anything to me, kind of thing like that, or you just kicked me out, so screw you. So long story short is this cycle has to come to a close, and this is the way that we recommend doing that. And your teachers have to know. This should be something all of your teachers know and understand. When you're an administrator, and like it says, your goal is to return a student back that is regulated, ready to learn, and ready to take responsibility for their actions. This is exactly what our teachers need to hear and know. This is what's going to happen if a kid gets sent to me. This is my goal. When it comes back to you, their tail should not be between their legs. When they come back to you, they should be in a better mental state than they came to me, and they should go back to you ready to learn. When you realize that, the mindset and the perception changes, and the teachers feel empowered too, because they got some say, they got some stake, and they felt respected, and everything, is much better. You're gonna have a few teachers, you're gonna have a few kids where this falls apart, obviously, right? Like some people are just gonna be mean, some people are not gonna accept that and all that kind of stuff, but it's gonna work most of the time. So I'm gonna take a pause right there. Does anyone have any burning questions about this reintegration process and what it might look like? I just explained it. Oh, go ahead, Kara.
I was just going to say this slide right there is very meaningful, and I think that's a struggle for a lot of our teachers. They don't realize and understand that that is the administrator's role, is to return them back to class for that. Like, they just always think that there should be a hard hammer that comes down. So I think maybe helping the teachers understand this, that will help within the process.
Absolutely. They want you to lay the hammer down or nothing changes, right? They need to know, they need to be shamed, they need to be embarrassed, they need to be yelled at, all of that kind of stuff, right? Did that ever work to you though? Like if your mom ever yelled at you or shamed you or embarrassed you, did you ever think, wow, I'm gonna act better now because I want to? Like, did you ever like get positively, intrinsically motivated by your mom or your dad or your uncle yelling at you? You know what I mean? And again, I might not have made that same mistake again, but I think that guy's an idiot. Like, I think that guy's terrible. Not man. All right. Yeah, that's
I
a
had
good
a
point.
comment. Oh, sorry. A comment when you were talking about how to, you're talking to the student how to role play, to come back to class, how to make that apology. I was thinking, we probably need to do that with some of our teachers because like you said, they want, I just sent them out for doing XYZ. Why are they back so soon? And so I'm thinking that might be a good PD for teachers to understand. Okay, the goal is to return them back. Now, you may still be mad, but let's role play. I thought that would be very valuable.
I love it. And that's a good point. And sometimes I do, if I have time, and I know you're all busy in administration business, stuff like that, the ideal situation is I talk to the kid and we work through it. And then I go and talk to the teacher and let them explain what happened and work through it. And then I bring them together with me there. And then we talk about what happened. And I let the teacher know, I'm the moderator. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to ask him questions. We need to take our emotion out of it. and we just need to answer this question. So I'll say, Mrs. Jones, can you tell me a little bit about what you saw from your perspective? Okay, Johnny, can you explain to me from your perspective what she had said? Okay, Miss Jones, would you like to add any details that maybe Johnny had left out? Okay, Miss Jones, how did it make you feel when Johnny flipped you off at that time, right? And Johnny, do you understand? Like basically you can have, like basically you talk to each one separately, then you bring them together in the ideal situation, right? But if you don't have that time in that day, the teacher at least needs to know that it will be brought back and this is what the conversation will look like. But yeah, absolutely. I've had teachers harp on the kid after I brought them back because they're still mad. Absolutely. But that's why we say, hey, I'm going to bring them back during third period. And you can either say now, or you can say sometime later in the day, instead of berating the kid and taking them now. Like, don't take them now if you're going to scream at the kid, right? You know what I mean? Sometimes they do need that hour away from that kid before they can calm themselves down. Very good point. All right, cool. So that conversation with you as an administrator, I told you about what it looks like to bring them back to class, but what does the conversation look like between you and the kid and you and the teacher, right? Like we talked about how we bring them back, but how do you repair that harm? So when we look at this, when we cause harm, like if I make a mistake, I need to look at it. And when I have a bad interaction with the kid, I need to be reflective of where I might have said something that I shouldn't, where I could have maybe had the kid not flip a chair because I could have said this way. I could look at my body language, my tone, all that stuff. But sometimes we screw up as the adult with the kid and we need to model apologizing back to the kid. Hey, you know, I'm sorry that I called you out in front of your peers. I know that must have been upsetting to you. Even if the kid did flip you off, you can still apologize for your part. Hey, I'm so sorry that I did this. I apologize to my whole entire class. The time that I held my whole entire class in for indoor recess, 5 kids wouldn't stop talking. I said, if I hear any more talking, you all are going to stay in here for recess. I kept my entire class in. It was a very bad idea. That day, a very bad idea. And I didn't have any other strategies to do, right? I brought them all in. That was my first ever reactive circle. And it wasn't even, I didn't know what a circle was yet, but I said, hey, what do you all think we can do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? The kids started talking about how we had been sitting for 30 minutes in a row being lectured to. The kids started talking about how rocks weren't really that interesting. I was teaching, I mean, I think rocks are interesting, but maybe a 7th grade doesn't think a sedimentary rock was that interesting, right? I heard all kinds of great stuff. I'm like, oh, you know what, everyone? I apologize for having us sit in this long a period of time, but what can we do moving forward? And I'm sorry that I brought you all in here today, even though it was only 5 of you. And I apologize to my class. Like I did, and I have several times throughout my career when I've made a mistake. So I'm gonna walk you through real quick a pretty complex topic as an administrator for repairing the harm. When you think about this, the kid got sent out of class, right? And your goal is to eventually bring them back, right? Like that's your goal ultimately. If you don't know the kid very well, which some of you don't, right? Because you have a school of like 1,000 kids, school of 500 kids, you don't know that kid that well. In some cases, I have to start with some rapport building. Like I have to say, hey, I'm Mrs. Jones. I'm the assistant principal here. What's your name? Oh, Johnny. Okay. Hey, how are things going so far this year? Like I have to spend a few minutes just with chit chat and small talk with this kid if I don't know this kid. You can't just jump into the tell me what you did. Like you can't just start there if you don't know the kid that well. If you're their teacher, we might start there. But if you're an administrator or a counselor that doesn't see that kid every day, we might start with some small chit chat just to put them at ease a little bit, make them feel comfortable. Because if they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to open up to you. After you build that rapport with the kid and you share a couple minute conversation with them, you say, hey, I'd like to talk about what happened today. Can you tell me what happened from your perspective? You get context with that kid. You say, can you tell me what happened today? Can you tell me what happened during third period? Can you tell me what happened between you and Mrs. Jones? I'd never, ever, ever, ever start the conversation with, oh, you're in trouble now. Oh, I heard that you threw a rock at somebody today. Oh, you cussed out your teacher. What were you thinking? You never, ever, ever start with an accusation or with your evidence you have against them or anything like that. You never start that way, because the minute you do that, they shut down. You just simply build some rapport and you are there to listen. You say, hey, I heard something happened during third period. Can you please tell me some more about that? That's all you do. It's really that simple. Well, I didn't do anything, blah, 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 blah. Then you might say, well, you know, it was reported that you teased somebody about their hair during third period. That's what I'm referring to at this moment. Or, you know, I heard that you had thrown a rock at recess or whatever. And, you know, we're just here to figure it out and learn more information about that. Can you please tell me more about that? You might have to point out to them what you're talking about at that point. They might start talking. You flat out listen to them for a couple of minutes without interrupting them whatsoever. You don't say, that's not what Miss Jones said. That's not what I saw on camera. That's not what I think. You just flat out let them talk for a couple of minutes about what they did. If they start to make excuses, say, no, we're not worried about why you did it yet. We're focusing on what happened. That's all we're focusing on right now. I don't want to hear about Susie and Billy and Antoine and Maria. I want to know what happened with you. Eventually they start talking, right? Your goal is to get them past this green line right here to acknowledge what they did. Because if they don't acknowledge what they did, you can't move any further. You can't build empathy with somebody who doesn't even admit that they called somebody a name. You can't repair the harm with somebody who is in denial that they had said something to another kid. If you don't get to that green line, the rest of the conversation is going to go downhill quickly, right? So at that point, you're getting context. You let them talk, and you say, when they're acknowledging their behavior, you say, hey, thank you so much for saying that. That must have been so hard for you to talk about. I really appreciate that. You did a great job. But if they don't, here's the fun part, right? I'm denying. Here's what you do. Well, I did actually see on camera you pick up the rock and throw it. You don't say you're a liar, or you don't say you're not telling the truth. You just say, well, I did in fact see on camera this had happened. I'm going to give you a chance to provide some details you might have left out. That's a very key sentence right there, said in that exact same way. And that is not on any kind of Google site. That's not in our book. That is something that you're not going to find anywhere. That phrase right there, right? I am going to give you a chance to provide any details you might have left out. You present them with some evidence. You don't accuse them in any way. Hey, I did see it on the camera. Or hey, I did have a few kids that saw it happen. Or hey, Miss Jones did see you do this. I'm going to give you a chance to provide a few more details, right? So giving them the chance to provide some more details when presented with evidence doesn't put them in a fight, flight, or freeze mode. It makes them think, oh crap, but it doesn't make them defensive. If you say, I have it on camera, everything you told me is not true, they're going to still deny it, even if they're on camera at that point. I do have it on camera. I did see you pick up the rock. I did see you throw the rock on the camera. I want to give you a chance to provide a few more details, okay? The kid usually is supposed to be in right then and there and admits what they had done. We're not talking about why they did it yet. They're not talking about how they're going to fix it yet. You have to get them to admit it. If they won't admit it right then and there, even if you presented some evidence behind it, you say to them the exact same thing that I said to them in the classroom. You know, I'm giving you a chance to tell me what happened. And if you do, this is going to be much easier. We're going to be able to fix this. This isn't going to go much farther. We're going to be able to solve this together. But if you don't let me know some of those details, I'm going to have to figure out what to do without you. You pull that same phrase right there that you had said in the classroom when the kid wouldn't listen or wouldn't actually admit to anything. I'm going to give you a chance to provide me some more details, or I'm going to have to figure out what to do without you next. I'm going to give you a minute or two to think about it. Then you walk out, or you sit over there, or you play with your computer for a minute or two. Just give them some time to think and process it right then and there. Almost every time, any conversation I have with a kid at that point, they've come clean at that moment. If at that point you don't have any evidence, no one saw it, no one knows it for sure, it's just what you had heard, you're going to have to end the conversation right there and say, you know, I'm going to give you one last chance to tell me what happened. And if you didn't do anything, then I really apologize for bringing you in today. But if I do find out that this in fact did happen, then this is going to be a much bigger deal than it is right now. So, you know, is there anything you want to say to me before you leave? And then you let them go. You don't want to give a kid a detention, a suspension, a referral, or anything unless you know pretty sure and have some pretty strong evidence against them. In a lot of cases, you know, especially when we talk about our students of color who are in here, and they might be in here when they didn't really do much, or they might be in here when another kid did it too. If we suspend them, expel them, give them a referral, it's going to really be damaging at this moment. So you better be pretty sure that you know this is true. Okay. So very rarely have I not gotten a kid to admit their behavior by using these methods. Once they do say, well, I guess I didn't, maybe I shouldn't have said something. Maybe her Poppet toy ended up in my backpack. I got that a few weeks ago. Maybe I did touch that, and maybe it did go in my backpack somehow. You don't focus on nitty-gritty details. Thank you so much for admitting that. That was really big of you. Okay, now let's move forward. So once I get them to admit the behavior, I go into the empathy phase. You know, who do you think was impacted? Who do you think was impacted when you flipped that desk in that classroom? Who do you think was impacted when you told that girl that her hair was stupid? Who do you think was impacted by this and that, right? I am just having the kid think about how their actions impacted somebody else besides them. Who do you think? They might need some coaching. Well, her hair is stupid. She deserved to know. I've gotten that before, right? Like I got them to admit that they said that her hair was stupid, but then they didn't understand that saying that was harmful. A lot of the cases they'll say, well, I guess I hurt her feelings and stuff like that. But sometimes they'll get to the point where they'll say, well, I guess her hair was stupid, or Mrs. Jones deserved it, or something like that, right? At that point, I have to provide some scaffolding. I have to say, well, you know, I understand that you might not agree that her haircut is your style, and I get that. But what is something that you really care about personally? What's something that you really care about? Well, my clothing, well, my shirt, well, my this, well, my that. Thanks so much for telling me that. How might you feel if somebody that you didn't know started talking about you and your clothing? Well, I wouldn't care. Like most of the time they'll get it then. Well, I wouldn't care. If they go that route, well, I wouldn't care if they did. So I've tried to make them understand the other person's perspective. The second step in the scaffold is, how would they feel if somebody did that to them? The third step in the scaffold is me. Well, you know what? I'm the adult now. If somebody had made fun of my hair and I was a student in school, that would have made me really upset. Like that would have hurt my feelings really bad. So you might have to turn on you and how it might have impacted you if you were there or in that situation. Eventually they do get to the point where they understand that they impacted others, they impacted their class and so forth and so on. I then go with, well, you did hurt Susie's feelings, or you did cause a mess in the classroom, or you did break this. How can we make this right? Like, what do you think you can do to fix this? Don't ever tell them to go apologize to somebody and it's not their idea, because it'll be an empty apology. It'll be meaningless. It won't matter. It'll be not heartfelt. I will say, how do you think you can fix this? 9 times out of 10, they'll come to the conclusion that they should apologize, that they should write a letter, that they should go and clean the cafeteria, and so forth and so on. They almost always get it. If they don't get it, you might say, well, if somebody had made fun of your clothing, which you care about, how would you want them to repair with you? Like, how would you want somebody to make it right with you? Still doesn't work, you go to that third scaffold, which is me. Well, if somebody had made fun of me when I was a kid, something that would have made me feel better would have been them apologizing to me, or them doing this or them doing that. The kid then comes up, well, maybe I'll just go and apologize, or maybe I'll just go and clean the classroom, or maybe I'll just, that is a great idea. I'm so glad you came up with this. At that point, the kid needs to go and do it. It might not be that period, it might not be that day, but they have to set up a time when they're going to go and apologize, when they're going to go and clean the classroom up, or when they're going to go and do that. That's the end of it. In most restorative conversations, I'm going to add one more step though, because that doesn't fix the fact that they did it in the first place. That doesn't fix the fact that they were mad in the first place. That doesn't fix the fact that they were angry in the first place. The very last thing walking out, and the last thing I'm going to talk about today, is the plan of action. This is the most important step. And again, this is not going to be found in the International Institute of Restorative Practice's questioning or anything like that. This is unique. We have to create a plan of action. This kid, if they cracked another kid's pencil because the kid was tapping on their desk, this kid, because they yelled at a girl because she did this to that kid, this kid, because they flipped the chair because the teacher asked them to move seats, needs to have a replacement skill for if they ever get mad again, for if they ever get sad again, for if they ever get frustrated again. So I end the conversation. Thank you so much. I am so glad that you are going to go and apologize to Mrs. Jones during third period tomorrow. But what if Ms. Jones asks you to move seats again? What if somebody taps on your desk again? What will you do next time instead of this? I try to have the kids come up with their own strategy or alternative to flipping a chair, their own strategy or alternative to flipping me off, their own strategy or alternative to trashing the room. Sometimes they literally do not know what to do because they have been angry their whole life and no one has ever taught them a coping strategy. At that point, I might have to provide them some coaching. Well, you know, when I get mad, I try this or this or this. Let's practice this together. You cool with that? This is a social emotional skill building opportunity right here where I can actually teach them a skill, or I can have them develop their own plan, or we can co-construct a skill together. Because, and I document this right here in my notes, because if the kid ever does the same thing again, I can hold them accountable to not following their own plan. And we can practice this plan again and refer back to this plan for what they can do. All right. I've talked about a whole lot of things in a row. You are not going to do all of this at once, obviously, right? It's way too much. I'm going to put you in a short little session, 8 minutes. What are you going to do first? Like, you've had 2 days of training with me. What have you done? Or what will you do first? We're going to have just a very short breakout room, and then we're going to come back and end together today. All I want you to talk about is, of all the things you heard in the last few days, what is your absolute first thing you're going to do? Doesn't have to be a big, long explanation. How will you get this into the hands of your teachers? How will you start this in your room? How will you start this in your school? So I am going to, hold on one second. I'm going to open the rooms. All right, so we're just going to have a couple-minute discussion. I want you to discuss what is your absolute first step. Go ahead and accept your invitation.
I accepted mine. Oh, there it goes. Okay. It kicked me back out. Okay.
Okay, cool. You're good. Yeah, no problem.
Hey, Brad. Oh,
Yep.
oh, I'm sorry. You was headed to a room, I'm sure. I was just gonna say, I'll drop the, like the sign-in registration to where they'll get their credit for today and the ELA, I'll drop that in the chat. So when we
Okay.
come back, then they can do that before they leave as well.
Okay, cool. Are they gonna have access to the recording?
Yes,
Okay.
I just
know
have to,
some people have
I
asked me
did,
that, so,
yeah, I answered Aaron just privately.
okay.
You know, because we're not just putting it out there, you know what I'm
Uh-huh.
saying? So
Mm.
few stipulations on being able to use it and that kind of thing. So if
Yeah,
they
sure.
ask me, then I follow up with them about that. So,
Okay, well, I won't make any kind of announcement about it. I was just wanting to double check with you, because I had been asked the same question as you have. Chat, a link to sign up for today, a Google form to get credit for today's training. So please make sure that you click on that form before you leave today, just to make sure that you do get that credit for attending. And I wanted to thank everyone for coming and spending your day with me today. My hope is that you learned at least one thing that is useful into what you already do. Keep that in mind. If you just do one thing from today's training or from yesterday's training or a few weeks ago's training, you're going to be doing pretty well. It's a lot this year, a lot of pressure, a lot of new things, a lot of new initiatives, a lot of variables in the world right now. So if you can find that one thing to latch on, that one place to start, it's going to be a huge win. I mean, I'm just grateful for everything you do as educators. I think that it's a tough job. I know that it's a tough job, and it takes very special people to do it. And I hope that I was of some help today and to help you do your job a little bit better. Kelly, is there anything else that they need to know for next time? I mean, before leaving today?
I don't think so. If you need anything, just reach out. If you had some resources to share, just make sure you share those, and then I will share them out with the group as well. And just happy to see you all today, and kudos for the hard work that you're doing and the progress that you're making in all your districts. So we just appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Make sure you click on that form, and whenever you're ready, have a great rest of your day.